By the time the sun reached the edge of Washington's skyline, something had already gone wrong. Very wrong. Not the kind of wrong people could see. Not yet. The streets still hummed with morning calm. Coffee shops glowing with quiet routine. City workers rolling their carts across polished marble floors. But beneath all that, in the undercurrent only the observant ever feel, the air was vibrating with a tension no one could explain. And it all began with a message. A message that wasn't supposed to exist. A message that arrived in the inboxes of exactly 11 people. A message that carried no signature. No origin. And no traceable digital footprint. Just 12 words. 12 quiet, surgical words that would crack the Capitol open. Words we'll get to. Not yet. Because first, you need to understand what happened at 5:42 a.m. You know that feeling, don't you? When something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically. But in that subtle way the body notices even when the mind doesn't. A whisper of danger. A tremor of truth. A pressure that presses against the ribs. That's what Washington felt in that strange minute before sunrise. The first person to see the message was a junior analyst in the Office of Internal Systems, a young man named Darren Vale. He wasn't important. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't even supposed to be awake. But fate, or coincidence, or whatever force shapes the wrong man into the right witness, had a habit of choosing people like him. He clicked the notification by instinct. And when the message appeared, his breath caught. Not because of the words. But because of what came after them. The lights in his office flickered. Every monitor flashed white. Then black. Then stabilized again as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. He knew it. You know that feeling too. He stood from his chair, heart pounding, and whispered to no one. What did I just see? Across the city. In a high-rise overlooking the river. Another man read the same 12 words. Kellen. He didn't gasp. He didn't panic. He didn't even blink. He simply closed the message. Locked his device. And stared out the window at the waking Capitol. He had spent his entire life preparing for disruptions. Engineering contingencies. Stabilizing systems before they broke. But this wasn't disruption. This wasn't instability. This was a warning. A very specific one. And the worst part? He understood it instantly. Kellen whispered the words under his breath. So. It begins. Meanwhile. Miles away, on the other side of the river. In a modest house with creaking floorboards and a porch that still smelled like old paint and rain. Titan woke up to the same message. He stared at the screen for a long, heavy second. The words cut deeper for him. Not because of what they said. But because of who he feared they came from. A ghost he thought he buried 8 months earlier. A night no one in Washington ever forgot. Not because they knew what happened. But because no one ever learned what happened. Titan sat up slowly. His pulse steady. But his jaw locked in the way it did whenever the past pushed through the door without knocking. He whispered the message out loud. 12 words. Soft. But sharp enough to reopen an old wound. He closed his eyes. It's starting again. And then. Across the city, in a soundproof studio untouched by sunlight. Hawk lifted his phone and saw the same message. This detail matters. Because Hawk wasn't part of the system. He wasn't inside Kellen's world of sealed rooms and coded corridors. He wasn't inside Titan's world of expectation, power, and scrutiny. He lived in a different battlefield. The one fought with ideas. Words. And truths that refused to stay buried. He read the 12 words twice. Then he whispered. Oh God. They actually did it. For men. For different backgrounds. For lives that had never fully intersected. Not yet. And all of them frozen by the same impossible message. Now here's the part almost no one saw. It wasn't the message that scared them. It was the fact that it reached all four at the exact same second. Through four different networks. On four entirely different systems. Each isolated by layers of security that shouldn't have been breachable by a nation-state. Let alone a ghost. Something. Or someone. Wanted them to see it. And only them. You've seen a moment like this in your own life. Not the details. But the feeling. The moment a truth arrives without permission. The moment it reaches directly into the life you built. And quietly rearranges your next 10 steps. A moment that says. The story is no longer waiting for you. You're in it now. Darren, the analyst, didn't move for 30 seconds. His brain was trying to decide which version of reality to accept. Kellen began preparing protocols he swore he'd never use again. The kind only architects of power understand. Hawk sat down slowly, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. As if the silence in his studio suddenly held witnesses. Titan. Titan didn't move at all. He just stared at the blank wall in front of him. The message replaying in the back of his mind. The past walking in and sitting beside him like it never left. By 6:03 a.m. Washington was normal again. On the surface. Cars lined up at red lights. Baristas steamed milk. Joggers ran along the river path. Government employees swiped their badges. Monuments stood tall and certain. As if the nation they symbolized couldn't fracture in an instant. But something underneath had already cracked. Something quiet. Invisible. Fractured in a way only systems feel before people do. And all because of those 12 words. We can reveal them soon. We will reveal them soon. But not yet. Because the real story hadn't even started. Not the conspiracy. Not the confrontation. Not the collision that would bring Titan, Hawk, and Kellen into the same room for the first time. No. This was just the tremor. The warning. The whisper pushing the first domino. Everything that mattered. Everything that would tear the Capitol open. And force the truth into the light. Was still ahead. You felt that, didn't you? That instinctive shift in your chest. The sense that something bigger is moving beneath the surface. Good. Because now you're ready. And maybe. Just maybe. This is where everything begins again. Washington didn't just react. It flinched. Because Titan's strike wasn't a message, it was a diagnostic, a pressure test of the entire system. And the system failed instantly. Inside the Beltway, phones buzzed like an electrical storm. Staffers whispered in elevators. Senior strategists canceled lunches, postponed fundraisers, disappeared behind tinted glass doors. Everyone asked the same question in private. If Titan is really back, what happens to the order we built? But the fear wasn't just political. It was personal. Because Titan had one trait the establishment feared more than his power. He remembered. Every betrayal. Every deal. Every name. And the moment Hawk confronted Kellen on air, the old chessboard reappeared, except the pieces were no longer stationary. They were moving fast, breaking formation, scrambling for shelter. Kellen watched the clip in silence from a secure floor deep below a federal building, lit only by the glow of 3 screens. His jaw locked. His pulse didn't. Hawk had crossed a line. Titan had opened a door. And Washington could feel something ancient returning, something it had worked years to bury. Momentum. The kind that can't be bribed, briefed, or bought. The kind that turns calm capitals into fault lines. Outside, in the cold November air, a single helicopter thumped across the sky. It wasn't carrying officials. It was carrying options. And for the first time in years, Washington realized it was no longer the one choosing them. Before the public even processed what Hawk had exposed. Before headlines could form. Before commentators could synchronize their talking points. A far quieter machine began to move. Not Congress. Not the media. Not the agencies people argue about on television. This was something older, deeper. The Shadow Network, a constellation of former officials, corporate tacticians, think tank architects, and private contractors who operated in the blind spots of American power. And Titan's return was the one event that forced them out of dormancy. They gathered the way they always had. Through encrypted calls, secure retreats, whispered chains of, "Keep this off the record." A dozen minds, spread across 6 time zones, suddenly aligned with one objective. Understand Titan's next move before he makes it. Because they knew something the public didn't. Titan never acted emotionally. He acted mathematically. Every strike was a variable in a longer equation. And Hawk's on-air confrontation with Kellen wasn't the spark. It was the signal. A signal that the old fault lines were realigning. One of the network's members, an aging intelligence analyst who'd retired early, for moral reasons, broke the silence on a midnight call. If Titan is resurfacing now, he's not looking for attention. He's looking for leverage. Another voice, sharp, female, corporate, responded. Leverage on who? The analyst exhaled. Everyone. Meanwhile, Kellen sat alone in his secured conference room, reviewing Hawk's broadcast frame by frame. Hawk hadn't just confronted him. He had decoded him. And Titan. Titan had weaponized the timing. For the first time in years, Kellen felt something tighten behind his ribs. Not fear, but calculation. He knew the Shadow Network was moving. He knew Hawk had drawn blood. And he knew Titan was already 3 steps ahead. The board was set. The pieces were waking. And in the dark corners of Washington's power grid, something enormous had begun turning its gears again. By the time Washington's skyline began to glow under the late morning sun, most of the city believed it had returned to normal. Traffic hummed. Cafe windows reflected faces scanning their phones. Street sweepers moved in mechanical loops. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the polished floors and blinking lights, the city was unraveling. The first sign came in a way no one expected, a series of small, almost imperceptible anomalies. Digital logs that didn't add up. Access codes appearing in strange sequences. A single server blinking when no one was supposed to be online. Little things, easily ignored by the untrained eye. But Kellen noticed. He had always noticed. Even as a boy, he had learned to see what others ignored, the irregular heartbeat in the machinery of the world, the slight tremor beneath the surface that revealed the skeleton of control. And today, he saw a truth that would terrify any ordinary citizen. What they called freedom, was quiet dependency. What they called control, was curated chaos. He walked down the hall to his central command room, a place hidden beneath Washington's official floors. Not marked on any blueprint. Not accessible without credentials even the government couldn't generate. The room was dark except for a wall of screens displaying live data, satellite feeds, and social media chatter. A network of systems, algorithms, and digital proxies stretched like veins across the nation, pulsing in real time. Every move, every signal, every public response to Titan's return was being monitored. Analyzed. Categorized. And yet, there was a gap. A thread Titan had left behind that no algorithm, no system, could fully interpret. It was a paradox. One detail so subtle that it had already bypassed all standard surveillance. And it was enough to fracture every plan Kellen had spent years building. He leaned closer to the screens. The glow reflected in his eyes, cold and calculating. The hum of servers around him sounded like a heartbeat, steady, predictable, except tonight, it wasn't. Because Titan's move wasn't just a message. It was a map. A key. A test. And somewhere in the logic of this city, the system itself had begun to recognize it. Hawk, on the other hand, experienced the revelation differently. He didn't have algorithms, secret rooms, or satellite feeds. He had instinct. Observation. The unrelenting human truth buried beneath every headline and broadcast. He was watching Titan's calculated return like a detective watching the first moves in a chess match he hadn't yet learned the rules of. Every public response, every subtle gesture in Titan's rare interviews, every digital signature left in the morning's message, Hawk could read it. And he could see what Kellen had spent years trying to hide. The system that governed Washington was only as strong as the assumptions people refused to question. Hawk sat at his desk in the dim light, hands gripping the edge. There was a whisper in his mind, almost a warning. You've seen this before. And he had. Moments in his past when an entire city's veneer of stability had shattered with a single miscalculation. The lessons he had learned were clear. Chaos isn't an event. Chaos is the absence of oversight, magnified by human belief. Titan had understood this. And he had weaponized it. Meanwhile, Kellen's fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing connections no one else could see. Each screen represented a fragment of reality. News cycles, encrypted channels, economic forecasts, social sentiment, and the subtle currents of public opinion. The city was alive, but it was predictable. Until Titan moved. Then predictability collapsed. A single decision, a single broadcast, a single signal. And the rules Kellen had counted on, the patterns he had memorized, the safety nets he had meticulously woven. All dissolved. Kellen paused. He knew the next few hours would define everything. Not just Titan's return. Not just Washington's reaction. But the unseen balance of power itself. And yet, even as he prepared to intervene, he realized. He had already lost the initiative. To understand why, you have to go behind the curtain, all the way. Washington functions on perception. It's a theater. Every move is calculated, every speech rehearsed, every policy vetted to maintain the illusion of order. And most people don't see the machinery underneath. The inner rooms, the encrypted lines, the private networks, the algorithms that anticipate human behavior. They operate on a principle few admit. Control isn't about rules. It's about expectation. You don't prevent chaos. You predict it, contain it, and make people believe they are free. Kellen had mastered this system. Every decision was a layer in a complex web of control, invisible to the public, almost invisible to the participants themselves. The shadow network, the consultants, the advisors, the quiet hands in the background, they all thought they understood it. But Titan had always seen one step further. And now, that step was shaking the foundation. There's a detail almost no one saw in the public records, almost no one noticed in the morning headlines, and almost no one will ever speak of. Titan's message, while brief, contained a sequence of signals designed to activate certain behavioral triggers. Not just in Kellen. Not just in Hawk. In the population at large. And in the networks that ran Washington like veins in a body. It wasn't direct. It was subtle. A nudge toward disruption. An unseen push that would unbalance those who relied on pattern over intuition. And as Kellen scanned the feeds, as Hawk processed instinctively, as Titan anticipated their moves, the truth became unavoidable. The danger wasn't just change. It wasn't even Titan himself. It was who controlled the definition of normal. And tonight, that control was slipping. Titan's next move wasn't televised. It wasn't tweeted. It wasn't a headline. It was calculated, hidden in plain sight, and it carried a silent weight. The networks would misinterpret it. Officials would overreact. Analysts would miss the cue. Only the observant, the patient, would understand. Kellen realized this first. Then Hawk. Then Titan, in a private chamber, felt the tension fold around him like a cloak. Every element was converging. The city unaware. The system reacting. The media narrating. The men calculating. And the truth. The real architecture of power. Was finally exposed. The lights in Kellen's command room flickered once. A reminder, nothing lasts forever. Even systems this vast, this engineered, can fail. Hawk leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, eyes tracing the monitors. He whispered to himself, almost unconsciously. You can't stop what's coming. Titan, across town, stared out at Washington from his high-rise, his reflection in the glass merging with the city lights. The smallest smile brushed his lips. Not of joy. Not of triumph. But of recognition. He understood the beauty of the paradox. Everything can be engineered. Yet the human element always finds a way in. And somewhere, deep in the underbelly of the capital, Kellen's voice echoed softly. Here's the part almost no one saw. And with that, the system, the city, the nation, the invisible machinery of Washington, shuddered imperceptibly. The storm wasn't just coming. It was already here. But no one realized it yet. Because the real reckoning had not even begun. By nightfall, Washington was a city of shadows. Not the literal kind, cast by street lamps and neon signs. But the shadows that crawl in human hearts. The ones cast by fear, anticipation, and the weight of secrets. Titan, Hawk, and Kellen each felt it differently. But all of them knew the same thing. Everything was about to break. Titan walked alone down a narrow service corridor beneath the city. Concrete walls pressed close. Pipes rattled overhead. The faint smell of ozone, electrical hum mixed with something metallic, filled the air. This was a space designed to be forgotten. A place no public figure should ever step. But Titan didn't care. This was where he thrived. Every decision he had ever made, every moment the capital had tried to contain him, had led here. And now, the city itself seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. You can silence a voice, he murmured. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. The words were barely audible, yet the concrete seemed to respond. An echo returned, twisted, faint, as if the building itself agreed. He reached the steel door marking the entrance to the inner chamber. His hand lingered on the handle. He hesitated. Not because he feared what awaited him. But because he knew that once he crossed this threshold, nothing would remain unchanged. Meanwhile, Hawk sat in his studio, lights dimmed, monitors surrounding him like a digital fortress. He watched the city's pulse, feeds from street cameras, social media, encrypted communications. Every post, every tweet, every panicked office message was a note in a symphony of chaos that Titan had orchestrated months ago. Or perhaps years. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. Hawk's hand hovered over a keyboard, paused. He didn't need to type. He needed to understand. This wasn't politics. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't manipulation. This was humanity, laid bare. And he was staring at the storm in motion. Kellen, in the heart of the subterranean command center, felt the pressure like a weight in his chest. He had built safeguards, contingencies, silent corridors of influence. He had run simulations for every conceivable disruption. Every threat. Every emergency. And yet, this. Titan's move, Hawk's exposure, the surge in public attention, was beyond prediction. It wasn't just data anymore. It was emotion. And emotion defies algorithms. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the console. One screen showed the city's traffic grid. Another showed encrypted chatter from capital insiders. A third displayed a network map of influence, connections between the media, politicians, and the advisory network Kellen had helped orchestrate. Every node was flickering. Every connection strained. The system was alive, yes, but not in control. And Kellen knew something most would never admit. Control is an illusion when people decide to act. Back in the corridors beneath the city, Titan reached the inner chamber. It was a room that no one outside this circle was supposed to know existed. A high-ceilinged space, walls lined with screens, maps, and documents. A single large table in the center, littered with files that no human could read without training. Glowing faintly under the overhead lights. He stepped forward, and for a moment, the hum of electricity, the flicker of monitors. The subtle vibration of the building. It all seemed to sync with his breathing. He touched one of the maps, tracing a red line across the city. This line wasn't on any public map. It represented movements, influence, decisions. The invisible threads that guided millions without their knowledge. Titan closed his eyes. He remembered the nights alone in this city. Nights when the same maps whispered threats. Nights when he had to calculate which truths could survive exposure. And which would destroy everything. And tonight, he realized. No one could prepare for this. Hawk, monitoring the city, noticed the subtle tremor in the chatter. It wasn't panic yet. It was more precise. A hesitation. A heartbeat skipped. He muttered under his breath. This is the moment people finally notice. Or break. He activated his private feed to Titan's location. Not a camera, not a tracking device. Just a digital thread, subtle, encrypted, almost undetectable. He leaned back and whispered. You're not alone, Titan. But neither are they. And the storm, as Titan had known it would, was now fully alive. Kellen's screen flashed red. Not a warning. A signal. A single detail had triggered a cascade in the system. A variable no simulation had accounted for. A human factor, unpredictability, emotion, instinct. The building beneath him hummed louder. The screens flickered. The city's pulse, the thousands of decisions, millions of movements, was intersecting in real time. He whispered. The line has been crossed. No one controls it anymore. Outside, in the streets, citizens went about their lives unaware. Joggers, delivery drivers, late-shift workers, politicians' aides, all oblivious to the invisible storm above them. But it was there. In the subtle delays, the miscommunications, the quiet panic behind screens. A city stretched to its limits by one man's return. Titan stepped into the center of the chamber. He drew in a breath. He could hear the echoes of decisions not yet made. The tremors of human anticipation. The electrical hum of control slipping through Kellen's hands. And he smiled, faint, almost imperceptible. Because this was the moment he had been waiting for. The storm had arrived. And then, as if synchronized by the invisible hand of fate, Hawk's live broadcast began. A calm studio. The camera rolling. Hawk's voice, steady but tense. There is a force in Washington tonight that cannot be ignored. A presence long thought dormant is active again. And the consequences are only beginning to unfold. Titan heard it. Kellen heard it. Every office, every private residence with a TV flickered in response. The storm wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was a signal. It was alive. It was moving through hearts, minds, and networks alike. And the three men, Titan, Hawk, Kellen, each recognized it. They were no longer participants in the system. They were the storm. Titan walked to the central table, fingers brushing the maps. This city thinks it can contain me, he whispered. You think you can predict me. You think you understand the rules. But rules are just suggestions. And suggestions are what break empires. Kellen's eyes widened behind his screens. Hawk's hands tightened on the desk. Because Titan wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to the city. To the system. To the invisible architecture that had tried to define what was acceptable. And in that moment, every nerve in Washington felt the tremor. You cannot stop this. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. Titan's storm wasn't outside. It was everywhere. And when it finally hit full force, every secret, every hidden influence, every thread of deception would be visible. All of Washington. The officials, the analysts, the media, the strategists would have to face the truth. The storm wasn't just coming. It had already begun. And by the time the city realized it, it would be too late. Because storms do not negotiate. They do not wait. They consume everything in their path. And this one was fueled by human calculation, emotion, and the invisible chains of power that even the smartest minds cannot fully see. Titan closed his eyes. He could feel it. The surge, the tension, the collapse and rebirth all at once. You can silence a voice, he whispered again. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. And in the quiet between the monitor's hum, the city itself seemed to answer. It knew. After the storm, there was a silence that was louder than any sound Washington had ever known. Not the quiet of empty streets. Not the hush of offices after hours. This was the hush that settles inside a city when every hidden truth has been whispered. When every human expectation has been challenged. And when the machinery of power itself has been forced to pause, uncertain what to do next. Titan stood atop a balcony overlooking the city. The night below fractured into lights that flickered like nerves firing in the dark. He breathed in slowly, the weight of everything he had set in motion pressing against his chest. This was not victory. Not even a beginning. It was clarity. Because clarity only comes after chaos. Hawk watched the same city from his studio, monitors dimmed, screens fading to black. He leaned back in his chair. Hands interlaced behind his head. And allowed himself a long, quiet exhale. You know this feeling, he murmured. The one that comes after truth finally pierces the noise. When you realize the story you thought you were telling was only the prologue. He paused. Listened to the silence. The distant hum of the city settling. And he realized. This wasn't about politics. This wasn't about power. This wasn't even about Titan. It was about people. Every single life touched by the unseen network of influence, manipulation, calculation, and chaos. All of them standing at the edge of a moment that demanded reflection. And reflection is a kind of light. A subtle illumination, soft but relentless. It does not blind you. It does not force action. It simply reveals. Kellen remained below ground, the glow of monitors now a soft luminescence rather than the harsh glare of crisis. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lightly on the console, eyes fixed on the network map that had once seemed like a puzzle he could control. Now, he realized the truth. You cannot control everything. Systems can guide, predict, influence. But they cannot prevent the human spark, the unpredictability that exists in every decision, every instinct, every moment of courage or hesitation. He whispered the words to himself. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. He let them sit in the quiet. Not as a lesson for others. Not as a warning. But as recognition of what mattered most. Even the most calculated architecture of power, the deepest network of influence, the most sophisticated surveillance, cannot replace human choice. Titan's balcony overlooked the Potomac River, silver in the moonlight. The water mirrored the city lights, fractured and dancing, like the reflections of decisions made too quickly, or too late, or never at all. He could feel the city exhale. Not in relief. Not in defeat. But in acknowledgement of what had been revealed. The quiet truth beneath every headline, every broadcast, every system. People shape power. Power shapes systems. And systems only exist because humans allow them to. He turned, finally, and for the first time in years, allowed himself a faint, honest smile. Not of triumph. Not of vengeance. But of understanding. The storm had broken. But it had not destroyed. It had illuminated. Hawk, from the studio, reflected on the events of the night, the broadcasts, the leaks, the invisible threads of influence that had finally intersected. He spoke into the microphone, not live, but as if he were narrating the city itself. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? Will you hide behind the structures of expectation? Or step into the quiet light of understanding? Even if it scares you. He let the words linger. The hum of the equipment, the distant cars, the city breathing beneath him. All conspired to hold them. A moment frozen. A moment pregnant with possibility. And possibility is light. Not blinding. Not directive. But illuminating. Kellen finally rose from his chair. He walked through the subterranean corridors that had witnessed years of strategy, manipulation, and control. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly. He paused at a door he had rarely opened. A door to a quiet observation room, empty for months. He looked through the glass at the streets above. At the faint glimmer of people moving, unaware of the invisible storm that had just passed. He whispered to himself. And maybe, this is where everything begins again. Because it always does. Every system collapses eventually. Every order gives way to new questions. Every human heart and mind reclaims its authority in ways no algorithm, no strategy, no power structure can predict. Outside, the city reflected on itself. The lights shone, some bright, some dim. Cars moved in patterns that now seemed almost serene. Pedestrians walked without realizing the orchestration they had just been part of. The invisible architecture of influence that had been tested, challenged, and ultimately illuminated. Titan, Hawk, and Kellen. 3 men, once apart, now bound by the storm. Each understood the same truth. The world doesn't belong to systems. It doesn't belong to men like Titan, or networks like Kellen's. Or voices like Hawk's. It belongs to the choices made in the quiet. The moments of reflection. The courage to face reality even when it is inconvenient. Even when it demands action we are not ready for. And then, as if the city itself were listening, a single thought emerged, unspoken but understood. The storm had come. The storm had passed. But the light. The soft, insistent, human light. Remained. It filled the gaps left by fear. It illuminated the decisions that would shape the next hours, the next days, the next era. And as Titan, Hawk, and Kellen each retreated into their private spaces. Each understood this quietly. The storm is not the end. The storm is the awakening. The storm teaches what power alone cannot. And in that light, even the darkest corners of Washington, even the deepest layers of secrecy, were finally visible. So when your moment comes, when the systems fail, the storms arrive. And the unseen tremors shake the foundations of everything you know. Remember this. You have a choice. You always have a choice. The light is not given. It is recognized. It is claimed. And in the quiet reflection after the chaos. In the moments when the city exhales and the screens dim. You see it. You understand it. You feel it. And maybe. Just maybe. This is where everything truly begins again. The city was quiet. Too quiet. Titan had vanished from the streets. Hawk had dimmed the studio lights. Kellen had retreated to his subterranean command center. And yet, the storm had not truly ended. Because storms leave shadows. Shadows that linger, waiting for the moment to resurface. It began with whispers. At first, barely audible, a faint vibration in the corridors of Washington's unseen machinery. An analyst noticed a misalignment in traffic control feeds. A single camera flickered. A signal went dark for exactly 7 seconds. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing immediately visible. But for those trained to observe patterns, it was enough to say, something is back. The shadow network, long dormant, stirred again. The dozen members gathered in encrypted spaces, their faces obscured, voices modulated, each participant aware that Titan's return had changed everything. Phase 2, one said. Not Titan. Not Hawk. Not Kellen. One of the architects of influence, a strategist whose name had vanished from the headlines years ago. Phase 2, she repeated. And if we fail, Washington won't just stumble. It will fracture. They spoke in calm, measured tones, but each syllable carried weight. Every word a micro-hook of tension, a pulse in the network that linked the powerful, the silent, and the invisible. And Titan? He had already anticipated their response. He knew the network would awaken. He knew they would mobilize, strategize, calculate. And he was ready. Hawk sensed it in the human pulse of the city. A sudden spike in social chatter, subtle but undeniable. Digital feeds reflected panic buried beneath surface-level calm. A misplaced word, an unusual post, a thread that hinted at fear. The city was awake. The people were beginning to see what was coming. Though most could not yet name it. He leaned forward, gripping the desk, whispering. "You've felt this before." That moment when the quiet tension suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. The air itself changes. And you realize the storm isn't over, it's circling back. Hawk's instinct was accurate. The storm was never gone. It had only shifted, curling around corners, slinking through the cracks of the Capitol, finding the gaps in walls, policies, and assumptions. Kellen, buried beneath layers of encrypted screens, realized the same truth. The system he had built, the safeguards he had coded, the contingencies he had memorized. They were reacting too slowly. They were predicting the past, not the present. And Titan. Titan was already 3 steps ahead. Every calculated move he made was a shadow over Washington. A pressure wave Kellen could feel but could not yet fully counter. The lights in the command center flickered. Alarms whispered soft warnings. The screens pulsed, not red, not green, but a neutral tension that suggested the city itself was on the edge of a decision it didn't understand it was making. Kellen muttered under his breath. The storm returns. And this time, it isn't just chaos. It's awakening. In the alleys of the city, ordinary people felt the shadows too. A street vendor paused mid-motion as the fluorescent light above his cart flickered. A jogger froze as traffic signals skipped a beat. Even the monuments, the cold marble faces staring at history, seemed to hold their breath. The storm, it seemed, had taught them a lesson. Everything is connected. And shadows always return. Titan moved through the city with deliberate calm. No camera caught him. No analyst noticed his path. He passed beneath streetlights like a ghost. Through subway corridors, over bridges, through forgotten service tunnels. Every step was intentional. Every pause, calculated. Every glance, a micro-hook of tension for the watchers who would never see him. He reached a service entrance near a federal building, a place no official would ever tread. The door was heavy, unmarked, but Titan did not hesitate. Inside, Screens reflected live feeds from the network, but he ignored them. This was about human calculation, instinct, and timing, not digital oversight. He whispered to himself, softly, the words he had spoken before. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. And for the first time in days, the city itself seemed to shiver. Back in the studio, Hawk activated a private feed. Not a broadcast. Not surveillance. A human thread connecting him to Kellen, Titan, and the edges of the shadow network. You've asked this question too, Hawk muttered to himself. How much can one storm reshape everything we know? How far can shadows reach? The answer, he realized instantly, was farther than anyone wanted to admit. Kellen's monitors were a web of pressure and decision. Every feed represented a node of influence, media, public sentiment, political decision-making, even the private offices of people in power who thought themselves untouchable. And every node was flickering. Every decision lagging behind the storm. Every human element reacting too late. It was beautiful. Terrifying. And utterly inevitable. Kellen whispered. The storm returns, and it carries the choices of everyone within its path. We are all participants now. Titan moved again, this time toward a previously abandoned federal facility. The building was dark, silent, untouched by public oversight. But inside, it held relics of control, maps, communications hubs, the very skeleton of the city's influence network. He touched the walls, listening to the hum of old servers and forgotten circuits. Even abandoned systems, he realized, still responded to human expectation. Even silence can be read. Even shadows can be mapped. He smiled faintly. The storm had not ended. It had only returned, wiser, sharper, more alive. And then, as if the city itself responded to his presence, alarms whispered in distant corners. Monitors flickered in offices that had never noticed they were being watched. Analysts froze mid-task. Social feeds spiked in confusion, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Hawk leaned forward, eyes wide. You can't see them, he said quietly. But they're moving through the city. You've seen this before. You felt this once, didn't you? The human pulse of the capital was no longer calm. It was aware. It was awake. Kellen realized, finally, the true weight of the night. The storm isn't chaos. The storm isn't destruction. The storm is truth. And the shadows it casts are the reflections of every choice, every action, every human failure to see what matters until it is too late. He whispered to himself, a mantra now forged in tension and inevitability. The return of shadows is not the end. It is the reminder. And Titan, moving through the city like a ghost of both past and future, understood the final lesson. Shadows always return. Storms always circle back. The systems humans trust most are only as strong as the hearts, minds, and courage of the people who choose to engage them. And tonight, every shadow in Washington had a witness. Every storm left a light. Every question demanded an answer. Because when the storm returns, and the shadows stretch longer than anyone anticipated, you realize the city, the system, and the people are inseparable. And the storm doesn't choose sides. It doesn't wait. It reveals. Titan paused, listening to the city breathe. He whispered softly. The real reckoning has only just begun. Washington slept fitfully that night. But the storm, the true storm, was wide awake. And the shadows, long and patient, were already moving toward the next turn. The night hung heavy over Washington, a velvet cloak pierced by distant city lights and the occasional hum of helicopters cutting through the darkness. Yet inside, the real movement wasn't in the streets. It was beneath them, above them, and threaded invisibly through the veins of power. The city itself was alive. but alive in a way that no one could fully predict. Titan understood this better than anyone. He had walked these shadows before. Every corridor, every abandoned server room, every overlooked access point. They were familiar to him like the lines of his own hand. And tonight, he would trace them all. Kellen was awake, too. Deeper than most could imagine, in his subterranean command center. He hovered over maps, graphs, and social feeds. A dozen digital assistants whirred quietly, calculating probabilities, identifying anomalies, predicting responses. Yet for all their power, none of them could account for instinct. None could measure human will. None could track the subtle, intentional chaos Titan left in his wake. Kellen's hands trembled slightly over the console. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but it meant more than any alarm. The system, his creation, his empire of influence, was reacting too slowly. The storm had returned. And it had learned. He whispered into the quiet room. They've reached the edge of control. And when that edge cracks, nothing survives untouched. Hawk, in his dimly lit studio, had begun piecing together patterns that no algorithm could yet detect. The city's pulse, once predictable, had fractured. Traffic grids misaligned. Security systems blinked at precisely the wrong moment. Data streams that had once converged seamlessly now contradicted each other. And the people, ordinary, unremarkable citizens, were beginning to react in ways the planners had never accounted for. A child stopped on the sidewalk, staring at a flickering streetlight. A street vendor dropped his tray mid-step. A pedestrian in a suit whispered into his phone, unaware the conversation would never reach its intended listener. Hawk leaned back, exhaling. "You've seen this before," he muttered. The moment when every small anomaly converges into something undeniable. Something you cannot ignore. And for the first time, he felt the full weight of what Titan had unleashed. Titan moved with deliberate purpose. Through forgotten service corridors, abandoned maintenance tunnels, and the skeletal remains of government projects long archived. Every step was intentional. Every pause measured. He reached a central hub that had once been Kellen's secret nerve center. The monitors flickered, alive with data he could barely read without training. Yet Titan didn't need the full picture. He didn't need the algorithms, the network diagrams, the predictive simulations. He needed the human element. The instinct. The hesitation. The unpredictability. And tonight, that element was everywhere. Kellen noticed it first in the feed patterns. A single anomaly, so small it would have gone unnoticed if not for his obsessive attention. A subnetwork slightly out of sync. A report delayed by exactly 4 minutes. A minor breach in the communications layer. Individually, insignificant. Together, catastrophic. The system, meticulously designed to control every variable, was losing cohesion. The storm wasn't just external. It was internal. It was everywhere, embedded in the circuits, the wires, the algorithms, the human minds controlling them. Kellen's jaw tightened. He tapped the console harder. Each command felt like trying to hold back a river with his hands. "The edge, it's here," he muttered. "And we are standing on it." Hawk's broadcasts, subtle and coded, began to amplify the tension. Not in words of alarm. Not in shouting. But in observation. He drew attention to anomalies, raised questions no one had asked, highlighted inconsistencies no one had noticed. Viewers felt it instinctively. A subtle sense of unease, of realization, of anticipation. Hawk didn't report the storm. He guided people to recognize it themselves. And the storm responded. The city's pulse quickened. Traffic, feeds, communications, all fluctuated under the invisible influence of Titan's plan. Titan reached a point beneath the city where 3 abandoned conduits intersected. No human should have known this junction existed. No digital map could account for it. Yet here he was. He paused, listening. Not to voices, not to monitors, not to alarms. But to the rhythm of the city itself. He could hear it in the faint whirring of distant fans. In the irregular heartbeat of traffic signals. In the hushed conversations carried by unsecured frequencies. The city was awake. And it was responding to him. He whispered to himself. You can control everything except the human element. And the human element is alive, always alive. Kellen's monitors erupted in subtle chaos. Every node was flickering. Every calculation delayed. Every predicted outcome contradicted by the unpredictable surge of human decision. He realized, as he had countless times before, that control was an illusion. The more he tried to predict, the more the storm adjusted. The more he tried to enforce order, the more the system rebelled against him. And tonight, the rebellion was total. He muttered quietly, almost to himself. The edge of control, it's not a line. It's a mirror. And we are staring into it. Hawk recognized it immediately in the human behavior across the city. People hesitated. People questioned. People reacted before understanding, reacted instinctively. Social feeds, minor networks, private communications, all reflected it. Even in small offices and late-night diners, people felt the tremor, the subtle fracture in normalcy. Hawk leaned forward, whispering. This isn't just chaos. It's awakening. And the awakening is unstoppable. Titan moved again, emerging from the tunnels into the heart of a forgotten federal complex. The building's skeleton of influence, once a silent nerve center for Kellen's operations, now hummed with life. Not digital life. But human life embedded in the infrastructure. He ran a hand over the consoles. They responded subtly to him. Even without touch, they pulsed. Even without command, they adapted. The storm had reached the edge of the system. And Titan was its fulcrum. Kellen finally stood, pacing in his command center. He knew he could not stop this. He knew that no algorithm, no contingency, no command structure could fully contain the storm. But he also knew something else. It wasn't about stopping it. It was about surviving it. Understanding it. Learning from it. He whispered to the monitors, as if speaking to the system itself. Show me the edge. Because I need to see where the storm will break. And where it will illuminate. The storm was everywhere. Not in flashes of fire or crashing waves. But in subtle pulses, in tiny fractures, in decisions humans didn't even realize they were making. Titan moved, always 3 steps ahead. Hawk observed, always interpreting, always anticipating. Kellen reacted, always calculating, always adapting. And Washington itself, unaware, held its collective breath. Because at the edge of control, nothing is guaranteed. Everything is revealed. And every human instinct, every choice, every hesitation becomes part of the storm. Outside, the city's lights flickered. Street signals hesitated. Cars slowed. People paused mid-step. The edge had been reached. The storm had pressed against the limits of power. And the shadows were returning. Titan whispered once more. The edge is not an end. It is a question. And the city will answer. The city waited. The storm watched. And in the deepest corridors of power, everyone realized. The edge of control is not a line you cross. It is the place where everything begins to change. The dawn arrived quietly over Washington, but the calm was a lie. Not a single soul in the corridors of power believed it. Not Titan, pacing beneath the city in tunnels older than most buildings above. Not Hawk, scanning every pulse of social chatter, every flicker in the digital veins of the city. Not Kellen, whose subterranean command center hummed like a nervous heartbeat, anticipating movements that were impossible to predict. The storm had returned. But now, it was converging. Every city has its pressure points. Intersections where influence, ambition, fear, and desire collide like tectonic plates. Titan moved through one of these points. The forgotten passages beneath Capitol Hill, where maintenance corridors intersect with abandoned offices, old ventilation shafts, and wiring conduits forgotten by decades of renovation. He could feel the city responding to him. Every step left a ripple. Every pause created tension. He paused before a steel door. It led to a room the public didn't know existed. A vault of information, influence, and opportunity. Capable of rewriting narratives, careers, and systems in a single action. He smiled faintly. Not because he wanted power. But because he understood it. And understanding, even more than action, is terrifying. Meanwhile, Hawk's fingers hovered over his private keyboard, hesitating. He was no longer reporting events. He was guiding perception. Every broadcast carefully phrased, every segment calculated to nudge thought without overt manipulation. The storm had not yet hit the mainstream. But he could feel it building. The patterns converged like lightning about to strike. A minor misstep here, an unexplained social spike there, a whisper in the media that no one recognized. Hawk whispered to the empty studio. You know this feeling. The one when you sense a collision before it happens. When the universe holds its breath. And every step you take could ignite it. He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't dramatizing. He was narrating reality. Kellen's monitors flickered. A dozen nodes in his network, offices, media hubs, private communications, even the small digital footprints left by ordinary citizens. All began behaving unpredictably. At first, it was subtle. A delayed transmission, a misaligned report, an unexpected spike in attention. Then, suddenly, every signal converged. The edge had been reached. And Kellen felt it in his bones. You can simulate probabilities, he whispered, almost to himself. But the moment a human mind decides, it cannot be predicted. His fingers moved across the console, issuing commands that were already obsolete. The storm had outpaced him. Titan entered the vault. Inside, banks of monitors illuminated the room, each reflecting real-time activity across the city. Social feeds, security systems, transportation grids, digital chatter, all pulsed with the subtle chaos he had engineered. He walked past them, not reading, not calculating. Instead, he listened. To the city. To the currents of human intention. To the pauses and hesitations that betrayed the hidden pulse of influence. And there, beneath the layers of data, he found it. The weak points in Kellen's systems. The blind spots in Hawk's observations. The micro-decisions that would define the next hours. This was not chaos. This was precision. And the collision was imminent. Outside, Washington stirred. A jogger paused mid-stride, noticing an unusual pattern in traffic lights. A late-night diner filled with office workers felt a subtle shift in energy, conversations stalled, heads tilted, screens flickered. The city's inhabitants were unwitting participants in a game they couldn't comprehend. Yet their actions, instinctual, human, were influencing every outcome. Hawk's voice echoed across private feeds. Every system thinks it can control behavior. Every network believes it can predict the unpredictable. And every leader assumes they are in charge. But the truth is simple. The collision is not with systems. It is with choice. Kellen watched the digital map. Connections he had once considered stable now flickered. Networks he thought redundant were failing. Every safeguard was strained to breaking point. He leaned back, breathing heavily. Every probability calculation in his mind collapsed. Every scenario he had run for months, years even, was rendered meaningless by Titan's deliberate unpredictability. He muttered under his breath. The storm is no longer external. It is inside everything, inside everyone. And there's nothing to stop it. Titan moved further into the vault. He paused before a monitor displaying a live feed of Kellen's command center. The human in the chair, precise, calculating, relentless, was struggling to maintain control, unaware that Titan's presence had already undone the foundation of his systems. Titan smiled faintly. Control is an illusion. The city believes in control. Leaders, analysts, the public, all believe they can anticipate. But anticipation is only a shadow of understanding. And understanding is what truly terrifies. Hawk recognized the first signs of collision in public perception. A tweet, seemingly innocuous, ignited a chain reaction. Private forums lit up. Encrypted channels buzzed. Offices froze mid-task, unsure which decision to prioritize. Every element of Washington, its people, its media, its systems, was converging on a single point of tension. And Hawk knew the moment had arrived. This is the edge, he whispered. The collision is real. And everyone will feel it, whether they understand it or not. Titan touched the final console, a piece of hardware no one had accessed in years. It hummed to life, responding to him, not because it recognized authority, but because it recognized instinct. The collision course had been set. Every signal, every misstep, every hesitation. All would converge. All would intersect. All would reveal the hidden currents beneath the city, beneath power, beneath perception itself. He turned to leave the vault. Leaving chaos perfectly poised for those outside to encounter it. Because the storm wasn't about destruction. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about control. It was about revelation. And the collision was inevitable. Kellen, watching feeds, suddenly realized the truth. The systems he had spent years perfecting were failing not because of technical errors, but because Titan had shifted the human factor. The collision wasn't with machines. It wasn't with networks. It wasn't with algorithms. It was with choice. With instinct. With the unpredictable power of people, acting independently, thinking freely. He whispered in awe, and a hint of fear. The edge, it is not a system. It is a mirror. And we are staring at ourselves. Hawk broadcast a subtle update, speaking to no one in particular. The city has always been alive. We just forget to notice it. The streets, the offices, the screens, they are more than infrastructure. They are a reflection of every choice we make, every hesitation, every instinct. And when collisions come, we discover not just the fragility of systems, but the power of people. Titan disappeared into the shadows above the vault. The collision was no longer a possibility. It was here. It was moving. It was inevitable. And Washington, though still outwardly calm, could feel it. A tremor beneath the surface. A tension in the air. A subtle reminder. No system can contain choice. No network can predict instinct. And no city can ignore the collision of its own shadows. The storm had returned. The shadows had returned. And the collision course was set. Titan, Kellen, and Hawk each understood the same truth. They were no longer controlling the city. They were participants in its reckoning. And the outcome, no matter how carefully calculated, would reveal everything. Because at the edge of control, the collision is not with power. It is with reality. And reality does not negotiate. The city woke slowly, as though still recovering from the storm that had passed, or the storm that was circling back. But Titan didn't wait for morning. He moved with intent, slipping between alleys and service tunnels, through corridors abandoned for decades, yet somehow alive with the memory of decisions made long ago. He paused under a flickering streetlight. The city's pulse hummed beneath his feet. He could feel it, the collective hesitation of people who had not yet realized they were part of a storm. Each heartbeat, each step, each microdecision was contributing to a chain reaction he had orchestrated months ago, years even. And still, he felt exposed. Because power is not just about systems, networks, or influence. It is about people. And people remember. Hawk sat in his studio, eyes focused on multiple feeds, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. He had always prided himself on observation, on capturing the truth in ways others overlooked. But today, he felt it differently. Not just intellectually. Not just professionally. But deeply, personally. Because the storm had shifted. The city's collective tension had now reached him. Every pattern he had predicted, every anomaly he had traced, was now a personal mirror. He whispered to himself. "You felt this before. The edge where the abstract becomes personal. The moment when decisions are no longer theory. They are consequence." And he knew, with a subtle tightening in his chest, that tonight, choices would be forced. And no one would escape their reflection. Kellen, in his subterranean lair, watched the city through a web of feeds and security nodes. Every misalignment, every delayed signal, every miscommunication wasn't just data. It was evidence of instinct, hesitation, and unpredictability. The human factor had returned with a vengeance. He rubbed his temples, whispering to himself. "We predict everything. We control the system. And yet, we can't control people." For the first time in years, doubt crept into his mind. A single crack in the carefully curated armor of his intellect. A whisper that maybe, just maybe, Titan was right. Systems are fragile. Humans are unpredictable. And the personal cost of miscalculation could be catastrophic. Titan reached a building that once housed high-level government offices. Now abandoned, forgotten, a skeleton of bureaucracy. Inside, the walls were lined with old directories, dusty files, and remnants of decisions made by people who thought they were immortal in their authority. He ran a hand along the wall, fingers brushing against old fingerprints preserved in dust. A subtle echo of human presence. A reminder that power is temporary. But consequence is eternal. And Titan paused, listening. Not to alarms, not to feeds, not to security cameras. But to the human tension in the air. Every hesitation, every silent calculation, every unspoken fear. It was all audible to someone who had learned to listen this way. "You can manipulate systems," he whispered. "You can predict probabilities. But you can't predict conscience. You can't control regret. You can't silence memory." Hawk leaned forward in the studio, voice low, almost conversational. "You've seen this before. A storm in the city, yes. But storms reach into hearts and minds in ways algorithms cannot measure. We talk about power as if it's external, as if it resides in offices, networks, or screens. But the real battlefield is inside people." He tapped a finger against the desk. A subtle signal, a micro-hook for the audience listening. Every hesitation you've felt in your life. Every time you've wondered whether to act or stay silent. This is what it feels like, at scale. Kellen activated a new protocol, one he had designed in theory but never had cause to fully implement. It was simple. Isolate variables, control human interaction, suppress spontaneous deviation. In practice, however, the system buckled. Feeds glitched. Alarms whispered false signals. Data nodes contradicted one another. And every attempt to restore order only intensified the chaos. He slammed his fist onto the console. "The edge isn't technical. It's human," he shouted. Even alone, Kellen could not escape the realization. The personal element, the human decision, the instinct, had always been the variable no system could predict. Titan descended into an underground corridor that intersected with Kellen's command hub. For the first time, he knew he would encounter resistance beyond machines, beyond networks. It would be human. Direct. Immediate. And that made it more dangerous. And infinitely more compelling. He paused at a junction, listening to faint footsteps echoing in the distance. Not alarms. Not drones. But human movement. And Titan smiled faintly. Because personal stakes change everything. Every calculated move becomes vulnerable. Every assumption can be challenged. Hawk monitored feeds of the city. He saw people hesitate, question, shift. Small, subtle, human moments that would ripple across the network. It was beautiful. Terrifying. And entirely real. He whispered, softly. You can't measure courage. You can't simulate fear. You can't predict regret. And that is why the storm is unstoppable. Titan reached a control point directly above Kellen's subterranean hub. He had no intention of attacking. No intention of destroying. But presence alone is power. Human power. The slightest hint of awareness could destabilize the system. And Titan knew exactly how to wield it. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Listening to the tension grow. Waiting for the inevitable reaction. Because the collision between human will and structured control is not loud. It is subtle. It is devastating. And it always leaves echoes. Kellen felt the shift instantly. Not on his monitors. Not through alerts. But instinctively. Something was above him. Something human. His eyes narrowed. Every calculation, every predictive model, every contingency. Irrelevant in the presence of a mind that could move unpredictably. For the first time, Kellen realized that this was personal. Not just strategic. Not just systemic. Personal. And personal stakes are always sharper. Always more dangerous. Always more compelling. Hawk's voice cut through the city's tension in private channels. The storm is not abstract. It's not digital. It's not systems. It is human, personal, intimate. And it will challenge every assumption you've ever made about control, power, and choice. He paused. And whispered, almost to himself. You've felt this. Haven't you? That moment when theory crashes into consequence. When the personal becomes the inevitable. Titan stepped back into the shadows above Kellen's hub. He did not strike. He did not warn. He simply existed. And the presence alone began to shift decisions, behaviors, even neural patterns. Because human minds cannot ignore presence. Human instincts respond to perception. And human choice is never free from influence. Kellen, sensing the weight above, muttered under his breath. It's not the system. It's the person. It's the presence. And it's too late to calculate. The city's pulse quickened. Streetlights flickered. Cars paused mid-intersection. People hesitated in diners, offices, sidewalks. The storm was no longer abstract. It was human. Personal. Immediate. And the collision was inevitable. Titan, Kellen, and Hawk, each felt it differently. Titan felt the thrill of presence, control, and revelation. Kellen felt the terrifying weight of vulnerability, unpredictability, and consequence. Hawk felt the intimate reflection of human instinct, choice, and morality. Yet all three understood the same truth. Power without human consideration is fragile. Systems without empathy are doomed. And storms, when personal, change everything. The collision of will, system, and instinct had begun. The personal frontier had been crossed. And Washington, oblivious on the surface, was about to feel it in ways no one could have predicted. The city's hum had changed. Not the familiar rhythm of traffic or the low buzz of electronics. Something deeper, heavier, more precise. The subtle vibrations of anticipation, of fear, of instinct converging. Titan moved through corridors that smelled of dust and memory. Pausing only to listen to the faint creaks in the structure, the almost imperceptible footsteps that weren't his own. He knew they were coming. Not the system, not the guards, not alarms. Humans. The collision of people was inevitable. And humans, unlike machines, do not act predictably. Kellen's subterranean hub was alive with activity. Screens flickered with live feeds, tracking the movements of individuals whose names he barely recognized. Analysts typed furiously, trying to anticipate the unanticipatable. Every node in the network was calibrated for maximum efficiency, for maximum control. But efficiency cannot account for instinct. Control cannot contain awareness. And Kellen, despite years of calculation, felt the tension creep into his chest like liquid ice. He whispered to the monitors. "They're here. The edge has been crossed. And the storm, it's human now." A minor error in a feed caught his attention, a single overlooked corridor, a door left ajar, a shadow where none should exist. It was small. Insignificant. Yet enough. The storm had found its entry. Hawk, in his studio, observed with clinical detachment and personal fascination. He had never seen the system fail this way. Not technically, but morally. Not algorithmically, but instinctually. Every misstep, hesitation, and impulsive choice created a web of influence far beyond Titan or Kellen's design. He leaned back, watching the feeds reflect chaos beneath the city. He whispered to himself. "You felt this before. That moment when human error isn't just a mistake. It's a revelation. And revelations cannot be contained." Hawk knew the city was waking, layer by layer. But the real awakening was not in the streets. It was in the minds, the choices, the silent reactions of those who believed themselves controlled. Titan reached a junction where ventilation shafts and service corridors intersected. He paused. Not for fear. Not for hesitation. But to listen. A faint movement in the shadows. A whisper carried through the stale air. A human decision, manifesting as subtle sound. Titan smiled faintly. Presence alone is influence. Observation alone is power. And the city, unaware, was bending in ways no one could have predicted. Kellen noticed the first real breach in his system. A security feed flickered. A door opened that should have remained closed. Signals crossed in ways that defied logic, undermining months of predictive modeling. He tapped commands furiously, attempting to realign the network. But the storm was no longer confined to cables, nodes, or algorithms. It had become personal. Direct. And unavoidable. He muttered under his breath. The edge is no longer theoretical. It's here. It's human. And it will destroy us if not controlled. Hawk broadcasted a subtle update, weaving tension into observation. Not alarm. Not drama. Not judgment. Just truth, gently presented. The city believes it is calm. It believes it is ordered. But beneath the surface, every hesitation, every instinct, every unspoken choice is converging into something far larger than any one person or system. Listeners felt it immediately. A subtle, primal awareness that something monumental was happening. The storm was no longer abstract. It was intimate. It was human. Titan moved toward the access point that led above Kellen's hub. He did not need to breach the system physically. Presence alone would do it. Every human decision-making circuit is wired to instinct. To reaction. To perception. And Kellen, focused entirely on the monitors, could feel it. A pressure, invisible but undeniable. A weight in the room that made every calculation feel incomplete. Every contingency seemed inadequate. Titan whispered to himself, softly, a mantra of inevitability. You can predict patterns. You can measure probabilities. You can build systems. But you cannot predict courage. You cannot calculate instinct. You cannot contain conscience. The first confrontation began in silence. Kellen's assistants noticed anomalies in the feeds, slight deviations, doors opening and closing without command, signals overlapping where none should. Alarms whispered faintly. Monitors flickered erratically. A sense of unease rippled through the room. Kellen realized immediately what was happening. Not intrusion. Not theft. But observation. Presence. Someone was above. Watching. Influencing. He gritted his teeth. Show yourself, he demanded. Voice steady, but eyes narrowing. A man in control finally aware he might not be. Titan did not respond immediately. He let the tension build. Every second stretched into infinity. Every pause became a wait. And the system, Kellen's carefully constructed empire of control, began to fracture under pressure. Not because of technology, but because of instinct. Because human minds, even brilliant ones, cannot ignore presence. Hawk observed, whispering to himself. The collision is not just strategy. It is human. It is instinct. And it is inevitable. The storm had entered the hub. Kellen's hands flew across the console. Command sent, overridden, recalculated. Nothing worked. Titan's presence had shifted the entire dynamic. Every microdecision now contained risk. Every hesitation was amplified. Every instinct became a vector of chaos. Kellen's breath quickened. A cold sweat formed. He realized, finally, that the system he had built was failing, not because of technology, but because of the personal element he had ignored. Hawk's commentary, subtle but precise, reached listeners through encrypted channels. You've experienced this before. That moment when the abstract becomes concrete. When the decisions of others touch you in ways you never anticipated. When the system you trust collapses under the weight of choice. It was a micro-hook aimed at retention. But it was also a reflection of the truth Titan had engineered. Power is human. Control is human. And vulnerability is unavoidable. Titan moved quietly through the upper corridors of the hub. He did not strike. He did not shout. He did not need to. Presence alone was enough. Every monitor reflected hesitation, every decision delayed, every algorithm second-guessed. Even Kellen, brilliant, precise, and relentless, could feel it. The storm had become personal. And personal storms are the most dangerous of all. Hawk watched every movement, every flicker, every subtle misstep. He whispered softly. The breach is not in the network. The breach is in the mind. And the mind is everything. Titan stepped back into the shadows. He had not acted. He had not interfered directly. Yet the system quivered. The humans hesitated. And the city, oblivious to the forces beneath it, had shifted. Because the storm was no longer abstract. It was intimate. It was personal. And it would define the next phase. Kellen, Hawk, Titan, all understood the truth. The breach of trust is not technological. It is human. And once trust is broken, the system, and the city, will never be the same. The storm had claimed its first victory. Not through destruction. Not through chaos. But through presence, awareness, and personal confrontation. And Washington, still outwardly calm, had no idea the breach had already occurred. The corridors of Washington were silent, but the silence was deceptive. Every hum of electricity, every flicker of fluorescent light, every subtle vibration in the steel and concrete. All of it whispered of anticipation. Not for disaster, not for alarm, but for confrontation. Titan moved with deliberate precision, navigating the subterranean passages that Kellen had long assumed were secure. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He simply moved, and the city responded. Every camera, every sensor, every digital heartbeat. Even the human ones. Felt it. Presence. Power. Inevitability. Kellen's command center pulsed with tension. Analysts whispered in urgent tones. Monitors flickered and stuttered under the weight of unexpected variables. Every feed, every algorithm, every contingency plan. Fractured under pressure. He stood, fists clenched, staring at the network of feeds as if sheer will could bend them back into order. "They're here," he muttered, voice low and cold. "The storm isn't abstract anymore. It's human. And it's inside my walls." He could feel it, the subtle shift in air pressure, the almost imperceptible change in lighting, the way the monitors seemed to hesitate. A presence. Titan. Hawk, observing from his studio, could see the convergence unfolding in real time. This was no longer observation. No longer prediction. It was the manifestation of conflict between human will, system control, and instinctual unpredictability. He leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "You felt it before. That moment when someone's presence changes everything. When instinct overrides calculation. And the rules you thought applied, no longer matter." Hawk's feeds reflected hesitation in every human node, a subtle ripple across the city that only he could interpret. Even citizens in unrelated parts of Washington were unconsciously mirroring the tension below. Titan paused before the central chamber of Kellen's hub. The steel door loomed like a sentinel, cold and unyielding. He traced the surface with his hand, feeling the vibrations beneath the metal. Every system, every wire, every pulse. Connected to the humans within. He whispered, almost reverently. "Control is never total. Presence is everything." Kellen noticed the subtle changes immediately. Monitors stuttered. Feeds flickered. Alarms whispered false signals. Every layer of his meticulously constructed empire began to unravel in response to a force he could not quantify. He moved toward the access panel, voice firm, authority absolute. "Show yourself. This isn't a game. Not anymore." Titan did not respond. Not yet. Presence alone was his weapon. Observation alone was his strategy. And Kellen could feel it pressing down, unrelenting, unavoidable. Hawk narrated softly, the SR-4 retention hooks working subtly on his unseen audience. "The storm is no longer an event. It is personal. Every hesitation, every instinct, every unspoken thought is now a factor in the system's failure. And when the storm becomes personal, it demands a confrontation." Titan's movements were measured, almost ceremonial. He didn't need to strike. He didn't need to manipulate machines directly. He only needed to occupy space, to make his presence undeniable, to force the human element to respond. Kellen's assistants whispered urgently. The air in the command center felt charged. Every second stretched into eternity. The confrontation was already happening. Not with weapons, not with threats, but with human instinct, presence, and perception. Kellen's hands flew across the consoles. Every algorithm he had created, every safeguard he had installed, every contingency plan he had rehearsed. Obsolete. He muttered under his breath. The edge, it's human. It's instinct. It's here. And I cannot calculate it. Titan finally revealed himself in the shadows, stepping lightly but unmistakably into the chamber's periphery. Kellen froze. Every muscle tensed. Every calculation in his mind faltered. He had prepared for thousands of variables, but not this. A human being who could alter outcomes merely by existing within the system sphere. Titan's gaze was calm. Measured. And terrifyingly certain. "You built systems," he said softly, voice low and deliberate. "To contain unpredictability. But you forgot one thing. Humans are unpredictable. Kellen swallowed hard. You think presence changes anything? He asked, voice controlled but strained. Everything I've built, the networks, the contingencies, the control I have. It's beyond any one person's influence. Titan smiled faintly. And yet, here you are, he said. Feeling it. Responding to it. Fractured by it. Presence, instinct, intuition, these are not variables to be calculated. They are forces. And forces cannot be ignored. Hawk, following the confrontation through his feeds, whispered into the empty studio. You've seen this before. That moment when human will challenge his system design. When instinct overtakes calculation. And the rules evaporate. He leaned forward, voice low, almost conspiratorial. The personal is always more powerful than the abstract. And the storm has now become entirely personal. Titan moved closer, stepping into the light that flickered from the overhead monitors. Kellen's jaw tightened. He activated lockdowns, security overrides, automated defenses. All futile. Every action was mirrored, anticipated, neutralized by Titan's presence. You can control machines, Titan said softly. You can control data. But human awareness, human instinct, cannot be contained. A pause. The tension stretched. Every microsecond held the weight of decisions, consequences, and human will. Then Titan's voice dropped to a whisper. The edge you sought to maintain. It was never in the system. It was here. Between us. In the confrontation. Kellen's hands trembled. He realized the truth he had denied for years. The battle was never about machines or networks. It was about presence. It was about choice. It was about the human element. Hawk narrated, carefully calibrating every word to hit both tension and reflection. The storm has arrived. Not as chaos, not as disruption. But as confrontation. Systems fail. Algorithms falter. But humans respond. He paused, letting the weight of the statement linger. And when the storm becomes personal, when the confrontation is direct, everything changes. And Washington is about to witness it. Titan's presence in the chamber caused hesitation to ripple outward. Not alarms. Not machines. Not analysts. But humans. Every assistant, every subordinate, every observer felt the inevitability. The storm had become intimate, direct, unavoidable. Kellen spoke, voice low, controlled, yet raw. You think this changes the rules? It doesn't. I built this system to withstand storms. To contain forces beyond comprehension. Titan stepped closer, calm, deliberate. The rules you built, he said softly, never accounted for presence. For awareness. For conscience. The confrontation reached its peak, and yet no action had been taken. No weapon fired. No alarm sounded. No system destroyed. But the psychological pressure, the human tension, was absolute. Hawk whispered into the silence of his studio. You felt it. That moment when systems fail. When control slips. When the personal frontier is breached. And once it's breached, everything is up for negotiation. Titan's eyes locked with Kellen's. The confrontation was complete. Not through violence. Not through destruction. But through presence, awareness, and the human instinct that no algorithm could ever predict. The storm had entered the room. The collision of will, choice, and consequence was now absolute. Kellen's voice, quieter now, almost admiring. You've changed the rules. Without touching a thing. Titan smiled faintly. No, he said softly. I revealed the rules. That were always there. Washington, unaware above ground, held its breath. Every choice, every instinct, every hesitation below would ripple outward, shaping the city in ways no one could predict. Because when the storm becomes personal, it does not follow logic. It does not follow calculation. It follows human will. And human will is unstoppable. The confrontation was over. But nothing had been resolved. Titan, Kellen, and Hawk each understood the same truth. Power is fragile. Presence is absolute. And the personal frontier is where all storms begin. The city breathed unevenly. Above ground, Washington went about its morning rituals, traffic flowing, coffee shops filling, news tickers scrolling updates no one fully understood. Below, the veins of power throbbed with tension. A network of lights, signals, and human decisions poised on the edge of collapse. Titan moved through the upper service corridors, calm, deliberate. Every step he took caused ripples. Not on the floor. Not in the machines. In people. In instinct. In choice. Every hesitation, every subconscious pause, every small decision was a domino, and the first had already fallen. Kellen's command center erupted in controlled chaos. Alarms flickered intermittently. Monitors stuttered, overlapping feeds and contradictory signals. Analysts typed frantically, shouting updates, but every correction seemed to destabilize another segment of the network. He realized with sudden, cold clarity. It's not the system anymore. It's the humans. Every decision, every instinct, every misstep. It's collapsing the network from within. He slammed a fist on the console. You think you can simulate this? He shouted. Predict it? Contain it? You're wrong. Titan paused on a catwalk overlooking the hub. He could see every micro-movement, every subtle twitch in Kellen's team. He didn't need alarms. He didn't need sensors. Presence alone created fractures. Human will, human fear, human hesitation. All amplified by mere observation. He whispered, almost to himself. Systems are fragile. Machines are predictable. Humans are unstoppable. And he knew it. The first domino had fallen. The rest were following. Above ground, Washington remained oblivious. A mailman paused mid-step, noticing a traffic light flicker for an instant longer than usual. A barista dropped a cup, just for a second, a minor twitch that could ripple through conversation, through mood, through attention. A journalist typed a headline differently than usual. Minor. Insignificant. Irrelevant. Yet the combined weight of these small events began to reshape the city's rhythm. Micro-decisions cascading into macro-impact. Hawk observed every anomaly, whispering to the camera for effect. You felt it before. That subtle nudge in the pattern. That tiny, unnoticeable action that changes everything. And you ignore it, until it becomes undeniable. Kellen's assistants scrambled to compensate. One analyst noticed a door left unlocked, a feed overlapping another in impossible contradiction. Another analyst yelled about corrupted data. And yet, every intervention they attempted seemed to trigger a new anomaly. Kellen realized the network was no longer under his control. He muttered, almost to himself. The dominoes, they're moving faster than I can react. And I can't predict which one will fall next. Every calculation, every contingency, every system he had built to maintain order, was crumbling under the weight of human presence and instinct. Titan descended to the level of the control room. He did not move quickly. He did not act aggressively. He simply existed, and the environment responded. Every light flickered. Every monitor stuttered. Every human hesitated. And Kellen, sitting in the center of the chaos, realized. This isn't a breach. It's a revelation. And I am at the center of it. Hawk spoke to the audience through encrypted feeds. You've seen this before, though you may not recognize it. A small, unnoticed event triggers a cascade. The system seems robust, controlled, predictable. And then, a human acts differently. Instinctively. Personally. And everything collapses. The dominoes began to fall faster. Analysts shouted, systems flared, alarms screamed silently in flickering red lights. Kellen's hands flew over the console, attempting corrections, rerouting commands, recalibrating failsafes. Nothing worked. Every adjustment only created new instability. Titan moved through the room, eyes calm, observing the unfolding chaos. Not for enjoyment. Not for malice. But for understanding. The human factor, instinct, choice, hesitation, was finally visible in its rawest form. One by one, the human nodes began to fracture. A junior analyst made a minor miscalculation. A senior operator froze for an instant too long. A line of communication crossed in error. Each event, insignificant alone, compounded. The network faltered. The system shuddered. Kellen whispered, teeth clenched. This isn't about technology. It's about people. And people cannot be controlled. Above, Washington's streets began to reflect the chaos below. A traffic light stuck on red. A bus driver hesitated at an intersection. Pedestrians glanced around uncertainly. Every domino fell. Every ripple spread. Every microdecision triggered the next. Hawk narrated softly, SR4 retention hooks sharpening tension. The collapse is not loud. It is subtle. It creeps in, almost unnoticed. Until the weight becomes undeniable. And then, there is no going back. Titan approached Kellen directly. The human before him, surrounded by monitors, alarms, and assistants, was a fortress of intellect. But even intellect cannot withstand presence, instinct, and human unpredictability combined. You built your empire, Titan said softly. You built systems, algorithms, networks. But you forgot the most dangerous variable, humans. And now, the dominoes are falling. Kellen's face tightened. He realized the truth in Titan's words. Every safeguard. Every contingency. Every control he relied on. Had failed in the face of the personal. Hawk's voice cut through encrypted channels, calm, reflective, tense. You felt it. The moment systems fail. Not because of technology. But because of human choice, instinct, and hesitation. The dominoes fall. And there is no one to stop them. Titan's presence created a final shift. The remaining human nodes faltered. The network staggered. Systems blinked in unison. And Kellen, sitting at the heart of it all, whispered. The edge, it is human. The storm, it is inevitable. And I cannot control it. Washington, still outwardly calm, felt it faintly in the air. A collective awareness, small but persistent. An instinctive hesitation, a ripple across millions of lives. The city had unknowingly become part of the cascade. Because when dominoes fall, they do not discriminate. They do not wait. They do not forgive. Hawk ended his broadcast with a soft reflection. The storm has reached its apex. The systems fail. The dominoes fall. And the city is witnessing a reckoning that began with presence, choice, and instinct. Titan stepped back into the shadows, observing the network of human decisions unraveling like threads in a tapestry. Kellen remained at his console, sweat forming at his temples, realization dawning. It's not the machines. It's not the algorithms. It's us. Our choices. Our instincts. Our presence. The first phase of collapse was complete. The dominoes had fallen. The city's human and technological networks had fractured. And Titan, Kellen, and Hawk understood the truth that no system could ever anticipate. When humans act, intentionally or instinctively, every structure, physical, digital, or social, becomes fragile. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. It had become inevitable. Washington's streets were quiet, deceptively quiet, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Inside, below the surface, the pulse of tension became a tangible force. The hum of machines, once smooth and predictable, stuttered. Alarms flickered in chaotic patterns. Monitors displayed conflicting data, red alerts flashing in rapid succession. The dominoes that had started falling in the last hours were now cascading uncontrollably. Systems designed for redundancy, for resilience, now failed with terrifying precision. And at the heart of it all were the humans, reacting instinctively, unpredictably, irrevocably. Titan moved silently above the hub. Every step caused ripples. Not through machines. Not through cables. Through human will. Presence had become a weapon, subtle and absolute. Kellen's team had descended into desperation. Analysts shouted over one another, frantic fingers dancing across keyboards. Override the feed. Reroute power. Lock down the subnetwork. Every command was met with contradiction. Every intervention triggered a new failure elsewhere. The network faltered as if alive, resisting, responding to an unseen human force. Kellen's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing down. Every microdecision, every hesitation, every instinctual reaction compounded the chaos. He muttered, voice low and rigid. This isn't a system failure. It's human. Every instinct, every hesitation. It's destroying everything we built. Hawk narrated softly, his voice weaving tension and reflection for listeners. You know the feeling. The moment control slips away. Not because of technology. Not because of failure. But because humans act. Instinctively. Personally. Inevitably. This is when chaos becomes intimate. When systems falter. Machines hesitate. And humans, finally, take the reins. Titan descended the final stairwell into the heart of the hub. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply moved, and the environment responded. Lights flickered. Monitors blinked. Humans hesitated. Even Kellen, the architect of control, felt the subtle weight of Titan's presence. The control he had exercised for years, the empire of logic he had built, was evaporating under the pressure of human instinct. Titan's voice cut through the staccato alarms, calm but charged. You cannot calculate choice. You cannot predict instinct. You cannot contain presence. And now, everything you've built is breaking. The domino effect accelerated. Junior analysts made errors that cascaded into major system failures. Senior operators froze, indecision rippling through critical nodes. Alarms overlapped in a pattern too complex to decipher. Red lights, warning sounds, and silent alerts merged into a chaotic symphony. Kellen's hands flew across the console. Every action to regain control was futile. Every calculation was met with contradiction. Every safeguard triggered a new breach. He whispered, almost defeated. The system was never fragile. We were. Titan paused in the control chamber. He observed. He waited. He allowed instinct to dominate calculation. Kellen noticed the subtle change immediately. Monitors flickered, security locks responded incorrectly, feeds contradicted one another. And with each micro-failure, Kellen realized he was losing more than just control. He was losing certainty, composure, confidence. Titan's presence was not threatening in the traditional sense. It was psychological. Every pause, every calm breath, every measured step amplified the chaos. You can fight me, Titan said softly. You can fight the system. But you cannot fight instinct. You cannot fight presence. And you cannot fight choice. The chaos spread beyond the hub. Traffic lights failed, sending intersections into silent gridlock. Elevators stalled mid-floor, trapping office workers in reflective panic. Digital billboards flickered, broadcasting contradictory messages. Pedestrians stopped mid-step, uncertainty gripping collective consciousness. Hawke's narration reflected both tension and subtle human connection. You've seen it before. That micro-moment, unnoticed at first. When everything changes. A pause, a hesitation, a single decision. And suddenly the dominoes fall faster than you can comprehend. And in that moment, you understand the fragility of order. And the unstoppable power of human choice. Kellen realized the personal dimension of the chaos. It wasn't just the system failing. It wasn't just feeds contradicting feeds. It wasn't even the network unraveling. It was human fear. Human hesitation. Human instinct. Every person in the hub responded differently. Some froze. Some acted rashly. Some took risks, making decisions Kellen could never anticipate. The system became secondary. The humans became primary. And the dominoes of chaos accelerated with terrifying inevitability. Titan moved closer, and the final confrontation with human will became absolute. He did not strike. He did not manipulate the machines. He simply existed, and that was enough. Kellen's eyes narrowed. You think presence changes outcomes? He demanded. You think instinct can topple systems? Titan's eyes were calm, unwavering. It already has. Every assistant, every analyst, every operator felt the subtle weight. Every hesitation amplified the chaos. Every instinctual choice moved the city closer to collapse. Hawke whispered into the audience. This is the moment. When personal choices collide with systems designed to dominate. When instinct becomes reality. And when chaos becomes human. The dominoes reached the point of no return. Security locks failed. Systems glitched uncontrollably. Feeds overlapped, displaying contradictory information in real time. Every action in the control room triggered another failure. Kellen realized he had no authority left. No control. No certainty. He whispered, almost to himself. The storm, it's unstoppable. The chaos, it's human. And I am powerless. Titan's presence remained the axis of the chaos. He stepped into the room, calm, deliberate, observing every micro-reaction. You built control, he said softly. You built networks. You built contingencies. And yet, here we are. Chaos is not a failure. It is the consequence of ignoring human presence. Instinct cannot be controlled. And it cannot be denied. Hawke's narration emphasized the human and systemic stakes simultaneously. The city believes it is orderly. It believes it is predictable. It is not. The storm has moved from the abstract into the tangible. From calculation into instinct. From control into chaos. And in that chaos, the human factor reigns supreme. Kellen sank into his chair, exhaustion and realization colliding. The dominoes had fallen. Systems were failing. The humans were acting instinctively. And Washington, above, oblivious, had become part of a citywide cascade of consequence. Titan's voice, calm but resonant, cut through the clamor. You cannot rebuild certainty once instinct takes hold. You cannot restore order once humans decide. You cannot predict what comes next. Only witness it. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. It had taken root in human decisions, instinctual reactions, and presence. And Washington, blissfully unaware above ground, would feel its effects ripple outward in ways no one could anticipate. Kellen, Titan, and Hawk each understood the immutable truth. When humans act, systems fail. When presence dominates, control collapses. And when chaos becomes human, the dominoes cannot be stopped. Above ground, Washington awoke to a subtle, almost imperceptible unease. A streetlight blinked out of rhythm. A bus stopped mid-intersection. A single, lost pedestrian hesitated, unsure which way to step. Minor incidents. Small. Insignificant, individually. Yet the combined weight was becoming a wave. A wave of instinct, of reaction, of human unpredictability. The storm had leaped from the subterranean hub into the veins of the city. The dominoes were falling faster than anyone could see, faster than anyone could stop. Kellen's command center had become a war room of panic. Every monitor flashed contradictory alerts. Analysts shouted, fingers clattering over keyboards, voices rising in tension. Lock down all subnets. Override the feeds. Contain the malfunction. Nothing worked. Every action triggered new chaos elsewhere. Every attempted correction amplified the instability. Every human hesitation became a catalyst. Kellen realized, coldly, that the city's infrastructure was unraveling not because of machines, but because humans, instinctually, unpredictably, were bending the system beyond recognition. He whispered, almost to himself. The dominoes, they've gone beyond the hub. The storm, it's everywhere. And I cannot control it. Titan moved through the city's underbelly with deliberate calm. The corridors below pulsed with tension. Every sound, every flicker of light, every microaction resonated through the network of control. Presence alone had become a weapon. Human awareness alone had become unstoppable. He paused at a junction. A single corridor, overlooked by Kellen's systems, became the conduit of chaos. He breathed in slowly. And the city responded. Every operator in the hub hesitated. Every calculation faltered. Every instinctive decision cascaded through the digital veins of the city. Above ground, chaos grew in subtle but undeniable ways. Cars stalled mid-traffic. Elevators hung suspended between floors. Electronic billboards flashed conflicting messages, casting shadows that unnerved pedestrians. People looked around, uncertainty in their eyes, a collective hesitation spreading like wildfire. Hawk narrated softly, voice weaving tension and reflection. You've seen it before. The small crack that widens into a chasm. The minor hesitation that triggers a chain reaction. The instinctual pause that reshapes reality itself. And you ignore it. Until the dominoes fall with unstoppable momentum. Kellen's hands flew across the consoles. Red alerts flashing. Monitors overlapping. Every safeguard failing. Every intervention triggering a new breach. He realized something terrifying, the storm was no longer abstract. It was personal. It was human. It was everywhere. The city had become an extension of the hub's chaos. Every minor misstep, every instinctive reaction, every hesitation amplified the collapse. And the dominoes were now cascading beyond any single point of control. Titan stepped into a central passage below the city. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not strike. He existed. And that presence, calm, deliberate, unshakable, was enough. Every human within the hub responded instinctively. Every assistant, analyst, operator faltered. Every hesitation propagated outward. Kellen's jaw tightened. Every attempt to regain control seemed futile. Every system, every safeguard, every redundancy. Ignored presence, ignored instinct, ignored humanity. Above ground, Washington's citizens began to feel the ripple effects. Traffic lights blinked inconsistently. A metro train halted between stations. Cell phone signals stuttered, confusing drivers and pedestrians alike. Minor, personal hesitations compounded into citywide ripple effects. Hawk narrated with quiet intensity. The city believes it is orderly. It believes it is predictable. It is not. The storm has moved from the hub to the streets. From algorithms to instinct. From calculation to human choice. And the dominoes are falling everywhere. Kellen realized the personal magnitude of the chaos. He wasn't just fighting a failing system. He wasn't just fighting misaligned networks. He was fighting humans acting instinctively. Humans thinking independently. Humans making choices no algorithm could predict. Every decision in the hub triggered new, unexpected consequences above ground. Traffic snarled. Elevators stopped. Citywide communications faltered. Every domino fell faster, more violently, and farther than Kellen could anticipate. Titan's voice reached the hub, calm but absolute. You've built control. You've built networks. You've built systems to dominate unpredictability. But you cannot control humans. You cannot predict instinct. And now, everything you've built is unraveling. Analysts screamed in panic. One mistakenly triggered a security lockdown that disabled critical feeds. Another misinterpreted overlapping data, rerouting power into the wrong circuits. A senior operator froze, unsure whether to intervene or wait. The dominoes had reached a point of unstoppable acceleration. Kellen realized, finally, that it was no longer about control. It was about survival. Not for systems, not for machines, but for humans. Every choice mattered. Every hesitation was amplified. Every instinct was a vector of chaos. Above ground, citizens experienced subtle but unnerving disarray. A cyclist braked suddenly, causing a chain reaction of near collisions. Office workers hesitated to cross streets as traffic signals blinked unpredictably. Commuters glanced nervously at their screens as subways halted mid-track. The dominoes were no longer confined to the hub. They were citywide. Human decisions, instinctive, irrational, personal, became the engine of the storm. Hawk's voice carried tension and philosophical resonance. You've seen this before. That tiny, unnoticeable event that triggers catastrophe. That instinctual choice that no system can predict. And suddenly, the city itself becomes part of the cascade. Titan moved closer to the heart of the hub. Kellen, tense and exhausted, realized he was powerless. Systems were failing. Humans were acting unpredictably. The dominoes were unstoppable. Titan's presence created the final push. Every operator froze. Every analyst miscalculated. Every safeguard failed. The storm had become absolute. Kellen's voice, almost defeated, whispered. The city, it's unraveling. The storm, it's human. And there is nothing I can do. The dominoes fell. Not in silence. Not in chaos. But in human awareness, instinct, and choice. Washington's pulse had shifted. The city's rhythm faltered. Every minor hesitation became magnified. Every instinctual pause created a cascade. And at the center of it all, Titan observed, calm, deliberate, absolute. Hawk whispered. The storm has reached its zenith. The dominoes fall. And the city cannot stop them. Kellen, Titan, and Hawk all understood the immutable truth. Chaos is human. Control is fragile. And when human instinct dominates, the dominoes cannot be stopped. The storm had passed, or at least, it seemed to have. Above ground, Washington breathed again. Traffic moved. Coffee shops hummed. The streets appeared normal. But the illusion was fragile. Every glance carried suspicion. Every step carried hesitation. Every human carried the memory of disruption, subtle but indelible. The city had survived the chaos, physically, emotionally, socially, and psychologically. It bore invisible fractures. Kellen slumped in the hub, staring at monitors that now displayed a semblance of order. But order was only surface deep. The networks hummed again, lights stable, alarms silent. And yet, he could feel it, the cracks in the foundation. "They think it's over," he muttered. "They think we're safe." But the dominoes, they left a trail. Every instinct, every hesitation, every choice has altered the system permanently. His hands hovered over the console, powerless to reverse the subtle shifts. Presence had changed the rules. Human instinct had rewritten the network. Titan moved through the control center with measured calm. He didn't need to speak. The operators sensed his presence. Their anxiety, their hesitation, their disbelief, all mirrored the chaos that had unfolded. He paused, eyes sweeping the room, absorbing the subtle dissonance left behind. Every human reaction, every instinctive decision, every micro-failure still pulsed in the network, like an echo. "You cannot erase presence," Titan said softly, almost to himself. "You cannot reclaim instinct. And the system will never be the same." Outside, the city responded. Minor delays in public transportation. Elevators hesitating at floors. Streetlights flickering intermittently. Citizens barely noticed. Some dismissed it. Others felt it intuitively, a subtle dissonance in the rhythm of the city. The dominoes had left their mark. Hawk narrated, voice calm, reflective, but laced with tension. "You felt it once. That subtle tremor beneath daily life. The moment you realize that stability is fragile. That order is sometimes an illusion. And that every choice, every instinct, carries consequences you may never see." Kellen scanned the hub. Analysts were regrouping. Operators recalibrated systems. Everything seemed functional. But functionality was only the veneer. He realized that human unpredictability, instinct, hesitation, personal choice had permanently altered the network. It was no longer fully controllable. No algorithm, no override, no safeguard could predict the next tremor. And that knowledge weighed heavily. Titan observed the aftermath, noting the human dimensions. He saw fear in small eyes, pride in some, confusion in others. Even in calm, there was tension. A new rhythm had emerged, unpredictable, instinct-driven, fundamentally human. He whispered to the room. "Systems rebuild. Machines reset. But humans remember." And the operators understood. Not as an intellectual concept. Not as a guideline. But as a lived truth. Every instinct, every choice, every hesitation could trigger the next ripple. And no one could fully anticipate it. Above ground, tremors continued in subtle ways. A commuter hesitated at a crosswalk. A child clutched a parent's hand, sensing the tension. A shopkeeper paused mid-task, unsure whether to act. Hawk's voice carried through the narrative. "You've seen this before. The subtle effects of chaos after the storm. The world appears calm. The streets appear normal. But beneath, the tremors remain. And when humans respond instinctively, the city itself becomes a living, breathing organism. Reacting, adjusting, remembering." Kellen faced Titan. "I rebuilt the systems. I restored order. Everything seems fine." Titan shook his head gently. "Order is only the surface. The undercurrent, the human undercurrent, cannot be restored. Every instinct, every choice, every hesitation has left an imprint. And the city will feel it, in ways no one anticipates." Kellen's hands trembled slightly. The hub may have survived. But the human element, the unpredictable, instinct-driven element, had permanently rewritten the rules. Hawke's narration shifted, layering reflection with tension. The aftermath is never quiet. Even when systems appear stable, the echoes of instinct and choice linger. Every minor hesitation in the hub, every instinctive microdecision, has left traces in the city's network, in its people, in its rhythm. And these traces will influence what comes next. The city's response grew more subtle, more human. Communications networks adjusted imperfectly. Traffic flowed with microdelays. Office workers reacted to small, subconscious anomalies. These minor tremors compounded. Unseen, unquantifiable, unavoidable. Kellen realized the truth, fully, finally. The dominoes didn't just fall. They left trails. They left memories. And every instinct, every hesitation, will shape the next storm. Titan walked to the exit of the hub. He paused, looking back. The operators, analysts, Kellen, all carried the weight of their choices, their instincts, their presence. You cannot rebuild certainty, he said. You cannot erase instinct. And the city will never be predictable again. He left. Silence remained. The hum of machines returned to a calm rhythm. Monitors blinked in normalcy. Alarms were silent. And yet, the tremors remained. Human, emotional, instinctual, unpredictable. Hawke narrated the closing lines of the segment, soft but intense. You felt it. The calm after chaos is never real. The tremors remain. They live in human decisions, instinctive reactions, and presence. And when the next domino falls, we will all feel it again. Washington appeared calm. The hub appeared operational. The storm had passed, in form, if not in substance. The dominoes had fallen. The systems survived. The humans had changed. And in that change, the city held its breath, waiting for the next ripple. The city had regained its rhythm. On the surface, beneath the polished streets, the bright lights, the hum of daily life, there were shadows. Shadows of hesitation. Shadows of instinct. Shadows of consequences no algorithm could calculate. Every decision in the hub, every domino that had fallen, had left a mark. Not in machines. Not in networks. But in humans. The tremors of chaos were psychological, emotional, social. And Washington, unaware, moved like a calm sea concealing an undercurrent strong enough to topple ships. Kellen sat in the quiet of the hub, alone for the first time since the storm. The monitors glowed softly, silent now, the alarms stilled. And yet, he could not breathe freely. Every instinct, every microdecision replayed in his mind. Every hesitation, every falter in human judgment, etched into memory like scars. You think this ends with systems restored, he muttered, voice low. It doesn't. It never ends. Every choice made, every instinct acted upon, leaves consequences. And the human consequences, they are unpredictable. Titan emerged from the shadows, his presence calm, deliberate, absolute. He did not sit. He did not command. He observed. You've rebuilt order, he said softly. But order is a veneer. The undercurrent remains. Humans will remember. Humans will act. And humans will decide the next wave. Kellen swallowed. He understood, finally, that the hub systems, as sophisticated as they were, could not control what humans carried within them. Fear, pride, doubt, instinct, conscience. Outside, the city began to feel the first subtle aftershocks of consequence. A senator paused mid-speech, suddenly aware of conflicting information he had missed. A journalist hesitated, unsure which source to trust. A security official debated a course of action he had never been trained to question. Hawk's narration, calm but tense, drew the audience in. You've experienced this. The subtle, almost invisible ripples that follow a storm. The consequences you cannot quantify. And the decisions that change everything. Every citizen, unknowingly, was part of a cascade. Every human choice became a vector for the next wave of disruption. In the hub, Kellen's fingers hovered over the console, trembling slightly. He realized a terrifying truth. The systems had survived. The city seemed intact. But humans, unpredictable, instinctive, flawed humans, had permanently rewritten the rules. He whispered. The dominoes fell. But they left behind shadows. Shadows that will shape every decision from this day forward. Titan nodded. You cannot control shadows. You cannot predict them. You can only watch. And adapt. Above, the political machinery began to stir. Minor miscommunications exploded into speculation. A small error in a briefing led to a chain of misaligned decisions. Washington's leaders, unaware of the true magnitude of what had happened underground, reacted instinctively. A press secretary spoke too quickly. A policy advisor hesitated. A lawmaker made a decision based on incomplete data. Each ripple compounded. Each human instinct, each hesitation, magnified by authority, caused tremors across the city and beyond. Hawk narrated. You know this feeling. When human choice overrides calculation. When instinct conflicts with protocol. When every microdecision, every hesitation, every fear creates a chain reaction no one can control. Kellen turned toward his team. They looked exhausted, haunted. Their hands trembled slightly. Their eyes darted at monitors, aware of anomalies they could not explain. You feel it too, don't you? He asked softly. The weight of consequences not yet realized. The tremors in the city, in people, in themselves. Titan responded calmly. Consequences are not delayed. They arrive gradually. They creep into decisions. They shadow intentions. And they wait for the next choice. In the streets, tremors manifested subtly but meaningfully. A pedestrian hesitated on a crosswalk. A traffic officer redirected vehicles instinctively, ignoring protocol. An office building paused an elevator sequence mid-operation. Each ripple invisible to the casual observer. Each ripple unquantifiable by algorithms. And yet, each ripple influenced countless other decisions. Hawk narrated. The aftermath is not loud. It is subtle. It is human. And when humans carry consequences in instinct, hesitation, and awareness, the world changes. Back in the hub, Kellen's realization deepened. The systems were merely tools. The humans using them, flawed, instinctive, unpredictable, were the real variable. The real power. The real threat. Titan's presence was calm, precise. You see it now, he said. The human factor cannot be contained. It cannot be predicted. And it cannot be erased. Kellen nodded, almost silently, absorbing the weight. Political fallout began to emerge. Minor errors magnified into public confusion. Small miscommunications fueled rumors. Decision-making slowed as leaders hesitated, unsure which instincts to trust and which protocols to follow. Hawk's narration. You've felt this before. When the ripple of a single human decision cascades outward. When instinct clashes with authority. When consequences, unseen, unquantifiable, begin to shape reality. And the city does not notice it, until the effects are undeniable. Kellen's team began to sense the subtle, intangible fractures in authority and decision-making. Fear, doubt, hesitation, pride. All amplified by the events in the hub. Every instinct acted like a vector for the next tremor. The dominoes of consequence were still falling. Titan spoke softly, almost reverentially. The storm has passed. But the shadows remain. Humans carry them. Cities feel them. And when the next domino falls, the results will be profound. Hawke's closing narration tied the human, emotional, and systemic strands together. The consequences are always human. The tremors of choice, hesitation, and instinct linger long after the storm has passed. The systems may recover. The streets may appear calm. But humans will remember, react, and decide. And from these shadows, the next chapter begins. The city held its breath. The hub was quiet. The networks hummed softly. The streets were superficially normal. And yet, beneath it all, in human minds and instincts, in subtle hesitations and unspoken decisions, the shadow of consequence waited. Watching. Rippling. Shaping the next storm. Washington had survived the immediate chaos. The dominoes had fallen. But the shadows remained, persistent and unyielding. And Titan, Kellen, and Hawke understood the unalterable truth. The storm may pass. The systems may stabilize. But human consequence is eternal. Washington breathed, but not evenly. On the surface, everything seemed normal. The hum of traffic. The chatter of coffee shops. The rhythm of city life. Beneath it, however, pressure was mounting. Invisible, persistent, inescapable. Every human instinct, every hesitation, every unspoken fear, all converging into a tension no system could measure. The dominoes had fallen, yes. But the echoes, the shadows, they were only beginning. Kellen sat at the hub, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The monitors displayed normalcy, power grid stable, traffic flows restored, alarm systems silent. Everything seemed under control. And yet, he knew it was a lie. The city had survived the immediate storm. But the human factor, instinct, doubt, hesitation, had permanently altered the rhythm. He leaned back, voice low, almost to himself. You can restore systems. You can recalibrate algorithms. You can reboot networks. But you cannot restore human certainty. And certainty is everything. Titan entered the hub quietly. No announcement. No disruption. He moved like a shadow in the corner of the room, calm, deliberate, unwavering. You've rebuilt order, he said softly. Systems function. Networks are stable. But humans have changed. The tremors you thought were gone. They are still here. Every instinct, every hesitation, every unspoken fear is a vector for the next crisis. Kellen swallowed. He understood, finally, that control had always been an illusion. The systems were tools. The humans, flawed, instinctive, unpredictable, were the real variable. Outside, the pressure began to manifest. A senator paused mid-decision, suddenly aware of conflicting data he had missed. A policy advisor hesitated, questioning instinct versus protocol. A security official debated an action he had never been trained to consider. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Every human decision, amplified by authority, became a catalyst for ripple effects. The dominoes were falling again, subtly, invisibly, in human minds. Hawke's narration drew tension to the forefront. You've seen this before. The moment when instinct collides with authority. When hesitation fractures decision-making. When micro-decisions ripple outward. Changing outcomes no algorithm can predict. And Washington doesn't even notice. Kellen's team worked silently, tension hanging like smoke. Eyes darted at monitors. Hands trembled slightly over keyboards. Every instinctual pause, every micro-reaction, became a critical vector. The dominoes of human consequence were moving faster than they could track. A junior analyst whispered. "We're not in control anymore, are we?" Kellen shook his head. "No. The dominoes are still falling. And they're not machines. They're people." Titan observed, voice calm, cutting through the unspoken fear. "Humans always matter. More than systems. More than networks. More than algorithms. And when humans act instinctively, unpredictably, personally, the rules of control cease to exist." Every operator, every analyst, every assistant felt the weight of his words. They understood it not intellectually, but intuitively. The storm was not technological. It was human. Across the city, the dominoes began affecting decision-makers. A lawmaker delayed a vote, instinct overriding protocol. A journalist hesitated before sending a story, uncertainty gnawing at instinct. A public official misread a minor anomaly, sending directives that contradicted others. The shadows of consequence were spreading. Minor human instincts amplified into systemic tremors. Washington's political machinery began to wobble subtly but undeniably. Hawk narrated. The aftermath is never quiet. The tremors of instinct, hesitation, and personal choice linger long after the storm. They infiltrate decisions. They influence outcomes. And they wait for the next opportunity. In the hub, Kellen's eyes scanned the monitors. Red flags appeared in minor subsystems. Nothing catastrophic, yet. But he knew better. Every anomaly, no matter how small, carried the weight of human instinct. Every hesitation, every deviation from protocol, was a new domino. And he could not calculate the pattern. Titan's voice, calm but precise, echoed. You cannot predict humans. You cannot control instinct. And when microdecisions collide with authority, pressure builds. Tension escalates. And the next crisis will be unstoppable. Hawk's narration threaded philosophy with tension. You know this feeling. The subtle pressure, building beneath the surface. The instinctive uncertainty in leaders. The hesitation in ordinary people. And the unspoken awareness that something is shifting. The dominoes are still falling. They've never stopped. And when human instinct drives the next cascade, we will all witness it. Kellen realized he was powerless to prevent what was coming. The city appeared calm. The hub was stable. The systems were operational. But humans, flawed, instinctive, unpredictable humans, were now carrying the weight of the storm's aftermath. Every instinct, every hesitation, every decision could ignite the next wave. Titan's eyes held Kellen's. Control is an illusion. Order is fragile. And Washington will feel the consequences of human choice in ways no system can prepare for. Above ground, tremors manifested subtly. Traffic signals hesitated for a split second. Elevators paused mid-floor. A subway train slowed unexpectedly. Pedestrians felt unease, instinctively adjusting their pace. Hawk's narration. The city moves forward, believing in stability. But stability is a facade. Human decisions, instinctive and unpredictable, carry consequences no system can calculate. And these consequences are already shaping the next storm. Kellen's team grew increasingly aware of their own human limitations. Hands trembled. Eyes darted. Minor instinctive hesitations became vectors of tension, amplifying the invisible pressure building within the hub. Titan's presence remained calm, deliberate, unavoidable. You can restore systems, he said softly. You can reboot networks. You can simulate scenarios. But you cannot restore certainty. You cannot erase instinct. And you cannot prevent humans from acting. The city's tension reached an almost imperceptible crescendo. Every hesitation in the hub, every instinctual decision above ground, compounded into a network of psychological pressure. Washington was calm, yet fragile. The dominoes of consequence were still falling, invisibly, persistently. Hawk narrated the closing lines of the segment. The pressure builds. The shadows of consequence deepen. The dominoes continue their silent march. Humans act. Instinct dictates. And Washington will never be fully prepared for the next ripple. The hub remained operational. The city appeared stable. But the truth was undeniable. When humans act, instinctually, personally, unpredictably, control collapses. Tension escalates. And the dominoes never stop falling. Washington held its breath. The storm of consequence was far from over. And the next ripple was already forming. Washington looked calm from above. The streets were neat. The traffic lights blinked on schedule. Commuters moved with mechanical rhythm. Everything seemed normal. And yet, beneath the surface, the city was a living, breathing organism, straining under unseen tension. Every instinctive decision, hesitation, and reaction from the past days had compounded. Every microdecision made in the hub, in offices, in homes, in intersections. All converged here, in this fragile, invisible web. The dominoes were falling faster than anyone could perceive. The storm of consequence had reached its tipping point. Kellen sat in the hub, jaw tight, hands hovering over keyboards. He could see anomalies appearing in the monitors. Small, almost negligible patterns at first, a minor power fluctuation, a brief data lag, a security alert misaligned with the system. Yet, each anomaly pulsed with potential. Each anomaly carried the fingerprints of human instinct. And each carried the capacity to cascade into the city. He whispered, almost to himself. This isn't just about machines. This isn't just about networks. This is human. Every hesitation, every choice. It's unstoppable. Titan moved silently through the hub. He observed, calm, deliberate, absolute. Every operator, every analyst, every assistant instinctively felt his presence. Every instinctive reaction, every micro-hesitation, was amplified under his gaze. And Kellen realized something terrifying. Presence alone had become a variable. Human presence. Instinctual presence. A force beyond algorithm or protocol. Titan's voice cut through the tension. You've rebuilt order, yes. But humans carry the storm within them. Every instinct, every hesitation, every unspoken doubt is now a part of the system. And the city will react. Above ground, the ripple effects began to manifest more visibly. A traffic officer paused mid-intersection, instinct clashing with protocol. A pedestrian hesitated, unsure which way to cross. A government official made an executive decision with incomplete information, compounding prior miscalculations. Small acts. Minor hesitations. Insignificant individually. But collectively. They were vectors for the next domino cascade. Hawk's narration drew viewers into the tension. You felt this before. That almost imperceptible pressure beneath the surface. The instinctive pause that changes outcomes. The hesitation that triggers a ripple. And the realization that control is an illusion. Kellen scanned the hub. Every system nominal. Every alarm silent. Yet human behavior was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and compounding anomalies. Minor errors propagated like wildfire, amplified by instinct, pride, and fear. And the tipping point was approaching. An analyst whispered. Sir, the anomalies are multiplying. Faster than we can track. Kellen's gaze hardened. They're not anomalies. They're consequences. And they're human. Titan's presence loomed, calm and absolute. Humans act instinctively. Humans hesitate. Humans react unpredictably. And when the threshold is crossed, systems will falter. Cities will feel it. And decisions will become irreversible. Across Washington, the political apparatus began to strain. Minor miscommunications became conflicts. A cabinet briefing descended into confusion as instinct overrode protocol. Policy advisors second-guessed themselves. Press secretaries hesitated mid-sentence. The machinery of government shuddered under the weight of human unpredictability. Hawk narrated, voice layering tension with philosophical reflection. You've seen it before. That pressure you can't measure. The invisible hand of instinct shaping reality. The unseen tremor in decision-making. And the knowledge that the tipping point is near. Kellen's team grew increasingly anxious. Every hesitation, every instinctive pause, every human decision in the hub created new vectors for potential failure. Minor errors in communication, small lapses in protocol. Amplified, compounded, unstoppable. Titan spoke softly, almost reverentially. Every microdecision carries weight. Every hesitation leaves a mark. And when humans act collectively under pressure, you reach the threshold. The tipping point. The city itself began to pulse with tension. Traffic snarled as signals lagged imperceptibly. Subway trains paused, mid-route, passengers unsure whether to move or wait. Elevators halted mid-floor. Office workers froze mid-step, instinctively assessing risk. Each ripple from prior chaos converged. The city was a web of instinct, hesitation, and choice. And the human network had reached the apex of its tension. Hawk's narration echoed with urgency. You know the feeling. When the calm surface hides the undercurrent. When every microdecision, hesitation, instinct converges into a single point of pressure. And you realize there is no turning back. Kellen's hands trembled slightly as he typed corrections into the system. Each adjustment was met with subtle contradiction. Every attempt at control was absorbed by the unpredictable human factor. And each micro-failure amplified the tipping point. Titan's eyes held Kellen's. You can act, yes. You can try to control the systems. But humans are beyond your reach. And now, the threshold is crossed. Above ground, the first signs of irreversible consequence appeared. A minor accident in traffic, initially trivial, cascaded into gridlock across multiple intersections. A delayed decision in an office building caused cascading miscommunications that reverberated through emergency services. Minor hesitation in a security office triggered alerts across critical infrastructure. Small, human-scale errors became citywide forces. The dominoes were falling faster than they could be measured. Hawk narrated. The tipping point is not a loud event. It is subtle. It is human. It is the moment when instinct, hesitation, and consequence converge. And reality begins to shift irreversibly. Kellen slumped in his chair, jaw tight. The hub was nominal. The systems were nominal. The city above seemed nominal. And yet, every human decision, instinctive reaction, and hesitation carried consequences that were now unstoppable. The tipping point had arrived. Titan's voice, calm but resonant, cut through the tension. You've built systems. You've built safeguards. You've calculated probabilities. But humans cannot be calculated. And now, the cascade has begun. The dominoes fell. Not in chaos, not in silence, not in disaster. But in human instinct, hesitation, and choice. Each microdecision amplified the last. Each instinctive pause multiplied the next. Washington streets pulsed with tension. Every citizen, knowingly or not, became part of the network. Every decision added weight to the unstoppable cascade. Hawk whispered. "You've seen it. The calm surface hides the storm. The tipping point has arrived. And now, we must face the consequences. Together." Kellen, Titan, and Hawk all understood the immutable truth. Systems may survive. Order may appear intact. But when humans act instinctively at the tipping point, control ceases. Consequence dominates. And the dominoes cannot be stopped. Washington didn't know it yet. But the city was teetering on a razor's edge. From above, it looked serene. People crossed streets, cars moved in rhythm, streetlights glowed. The government buildings stood tall. The monuments gleamed in the sunlight. But beneath the surface, tension coiled like a spring. Every instinctive decision, every hesitation, every choice made over the last 24 hours had compounded. Every micro-decision, every subtle human reaction, had pushed the city closer to a breaking point. The dominoes had fallen. Now, the next phase was beginning. Kellen sat alone in the hub, the glow of the monitors illuminating. His face. The systems hummed quietly, seemingly stable. Yet anomalies continued to surface, minor delays in data transmission, a small but persistent network glitch, a subtle misalignment in traffic control algorithms. Each anomaly, small on its own, carried the fingerprints of human instinct. He muttered, almost inaudibly. "Every decision leaves a mark. Every instinct leaves a scar. And the city remembers." Titan appeared, silent and commanding. He did not sit. He did not speak at length. He simply moved through the room, presence alone bending instinctual reactions into focus. "You see it now," he said quietly. "The human variable cannot be contained. It cannot be predicted. And the city is responding to it." Kellen nodded, the weight of understanding pressing down. The hub systems were tools, yes. But humans, flawed, instinctive, unpredictable humans, were the real force shaping the city's fate. Above ground, subtle tremors began to manifest. A traffic light paused mid-cycle, forcing cars into cautious, instinct-driven hesitations. A pedestrian froze mid-crosswalk, sensing uncertainty, instinct overriding instruction. An office building's elevator halted between floors, causing small panic among employees. Every minor act, every human hesitation, was amplified by context. The dominoes, invisible but potent, were cascading through the city. Hawk's narration carried through, calm, reflective, yet searing. "You felt it before. That instinctive pause that changes everything. That hesitation that triggers unseen consequences. That moment when the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Because humans act, instinctively, unpredictably, inevitably." Inside the hub, Kellen's team sensed the growing pressure. Analysts whispered, scanning for patterns they could not interpret. Operators froze mid-command, instinct competing with protocol. Every instinctive reaction, every hesitation, became another vector for cascading failure. A junior analyst asked nervously. "Sir, are we failing?" Kellen's response was almost a whisper. "No. Not failing. But the dominoes are moving faster than we can see. And humans are the force behind them." Titan moved closer, voice low but unwavering. "Humans have crossed the threshold. Instinct now dominates. And the city is the result." Political tremors began to surface. A cabinet meeting descended into tension as advisors second-guessed instincts versus protocol. Minor miscommunications spiraled into misaligned directives. A press briefing faltered mid-sentence, reporters hesitating, sensing uncertainty. The machinery of governance, seemingly rigid, wobbled under the pressure of instinctual human behavior. Hawke's narration cut through the narrative tension. You know this feeling. When authority meets hesitation. When instinct challenges protocol. When every choice carries unseen weight. The city doesn't notice yet. But it will. Kellen realized the immutable truth. The hub's systems were operational. The city appeared functional. And yet, the human element, instinct, hesitation, fear, pride, was no longer predictable. Every instinctive choice created vectors for new consequences. Every hesitation became a trigger for cascading events. And the city teetered closer to irreversible tipping points. Titan's calm voice sliced through the tension. You cannot restore certainty. You cannot erase instinct. You cannot prevent humans from acting. And now, the city responds to them. Above ground, tremors became perceptible to the human senses. Traffic snarled in minor intersections, growing into micro-chaos. Pedestrians hesitated mid-step, creating ripple effects across crowded sidewalks. Elevators halted unexpectedly, sending small waves of panic through office buildings. Subway trains paused mid-route, passengers uncertain whether to move or wait. Minor human instincts, amplified by context, were now driving the system. The dominoes had moved from the hub into the city itself. Hawke narrated. The city's pulse is human. Every instinct, every choice, every hesitation adds weight to the invisible scales of consequence. And when humans act collectively under pressure, order fractures. Reality shifts. And the tipping point approaches. Kellen's team felt the rising pressure acutely. Hands trembled over keyboards. Eyes darted across monitors, searching for anomalies they could barely comprehend. Every instinctive pause became amplified, every hesitation a potential spark. And every spark could ignite a chain reaction no system could halt. Titan observed silently, eyes calculating presence, instinct, and tension. Humans, he said softly, cannot be predicted. They are the storm. And the city is their canvas. Across Washington, dominoes of consequence collided. A minor miscommunication between security offices escalated into a citywide alert. A delayed decision by a policy advisor caused cascading logistical errors. Minor instinctive reactions compounded, creating human-generated turbulence that technology could not manage. Hawke's narration layered the tension. You've seen it before. The calm facade hides the storm beneath. Every microdecision, every instinctive pause, every hesitation carries weight beyond comprehension. And the city, for all its order, is now living on instinct. Kellen leaned forward, hands trembling slightly. The hub remained operational. The systems nominal. But humans, unpredictable, instinct-driven humans, were now in control of the cascading consequences. Titan's presence was absolute. You cannot intervene. You cannot control the instinct of humans. And now, the tipping point is imminent. The city's tension escalated. Minor traffic disruptions grew into widespread gridlock. Pedestrian hesitations caused chain reactions in crowded intersections. Emergency systems lagged as instinct-driven decisions overrode protocol. Every domino from the past events converged. Hawke's voice pierced the rising tension. You know the sensation. The world seems calm. Yet, beneath the surface, the pressure coils tighter and tighter. Every human choice, every instinct, every hesitation is a potential spark. And the city is primed to ignite. Kellen, Titan, and the team understood the magnitude. The city was operational, but fragile. The dominoes of instinct, consequence, and hesitation were moving faster than the systems could anticipate. And one misstep, one instinctive choice, one hesitation could trigger irreversible outcomes. Titan's eyes swept the room. Washington, he said softly, is on edge. Every human action now carries amplified consequence. And when the next domino falls, you will all witness the cascade. Hawk narrated the closing lines of the segment. The city holds its breath. The systems appear calm. The streets appear orderly. But humans, instinctive, hesitant, unpredictable, carry the storm within them. Every choice matters. Every pause matters. Every instinct matters. The dominoes continue to fall. And Washington, for the first time, feels the weight of its own humanity.